Well, we've made it this far together, so let's see if we can hang together here to get into some important questions that we need to dig into. Let's start with the big question. How could we actually make revolution in a country like the U.S.? In order to get into this, it's important to discuss what the path to revolution, the path to being able to seize power is in different countries, in different parts of the world, in order that we can understand how it could come about here. I talked about the lopsidedness in the world. There are basically, this refers to a great divide in the world between two different types of countries, among other things. The great majority of countries in the world, what is generally referred to as the third world, are made up of countries where the people in their great majority are in very desperate and deeply impoverished conditions, where the conditions in the country have been maintained through the workings of the imperialist system in a backward state, especially in the countryside, where people, particularly in the countryside, are barely able to eke out a living and often even have to leave the countryside, where the means of communication and transportation do not extend evenly and uniformly throughout the country, and where the reach of the central authority, the ruling government or state, does not extend powerfully throughout all parts of the country, but is centered in the urban areas where the seats of government and the seats of power are. In many of these countries, for example, in places like Nepal or in Peru, in the remote parts of the countryside, and especially this is true if the areas are mountainous, it's very difficult for the government to move large numbers of forces, troops, and equipment and so on, and concentrate it quickly in an area that's remote from the capital and the major cities of concentrated population. Now, some of this has changed with the development of things and means of communication, satellites and so on, helicopters and other things in recent years. But still, this basic condition continues to exist in these countries. For example, in a place like Nepal, you might have in some of the remote areas, the most you might have is a police outpost in some area with a few police in it, not a large army garrison. You have army garrisons, but they're generally closer to the cities. So this provides the opportunity as well as the necessity in making a revolution in these kinds of countries to begin more or less from the start taking up guerrilla warfare as the main form of revolutionary struggle. It's both possible to do that and necessary to do it, but particularly I want to underline possible. This in an important way is an advantage of a country like that in terms of making revolution, because they can begin on a small scale. They can build up their forces little by little before they have to engage anything like the concentrated power of the military of the other side, which for the reasons I mentioned is difficult for the ruling structures and ruling classes in those countries to concentrate quickly in these remote areas. So over a period of time, as has happened in Nepal, you see the gradual buildup of the forces there of revolution, where they go from having just squads to having larger military units in the People's Army, and eventually larger and larger units capable of fighting larger and larger scale battles. In accordance with these kinds of conditions, the strategy there, the road to revolution, the road to power, is what's referred to as protracted people's war. It's a people's war because it relies on the masses of people, in particular the peasantry in the countryside, ultimately on the masses of exploited and oppressed people as a whole, but particularly in the beginning stages and for a whole period, relies particularly on the peasants in the countryside to support it, to join the army, to feed and support the army. And it's protracted because it does build up little by little and gradually. It doesn't have to and doesn't seek to fight decisive battles with the other side all at once or quickly, but only after a long or protracted period in which the forces of the Revolutionary Army have been built up while the forces of the other side have been worn down, have been defeated in many battles, and begin to disintegrate within themselves, so that finally, in this way, surrounding the cities, the seats of power of the old system, surrounding them from the countryside, eventually from the inside and from the outside, through the advance of the People's Army from the countryside toward the city, and then together with that eventually through the uprising, the organized uprising and insurrection of the people in the cities, you can finally defeat the old system and its armed forces right in their seats of power and win power throughout the country as a whole. So this is a path in these kinds of countries of protracted people's war, which involves surrounding the city from the countryside and then finally taking the cities through a combination of from the outside with the advancing army and from the inside with the organized uprising and insurrection of the masses of people in the cities. And things such as general strikes in the cities, for example, serve as preparation and in some ways even dress rehearsals for eventually converting what is a non-military struggle, a general strike and political struggle there, into an outright military struggle, that is an insurrection, when things have been ripened through the advance of this protracted people's war. So that's one side of the lopsidedness in the world, and one kind of strategy that suits that type of country, and has been successfully applied by the Chinese in their revolution, by the Vietnamese, and now by people in Peru, and particularly right now in Nepal. Obviously, the U.S. is a very different kind of country. Is on the other side of this great lopsidedness, this great gulf in the world. Some of the police departments in the major cities in the U.S. and the equipment that they have is more powerful than sections of the army in some of these third world countries. In this kind of country, you cannot wage a protracted armed struggle and hope to do what they do in these third world countries, gradually accumulate strength and accumulate force without having to fight decisive battles with major military formations of the other side over a whole period of time until you finally get to where you could do that. People who have tried to apply a protracted war strategy in this kind of a situation, and some people have made attempts that are genuinely heroic in trying to do it, but they have not been able to do it. They have not been able to make that a protracted people's war because they were not able to involve the people, because you cannot, in these conditions, gradually, bit by bit, build up your forces, begin to accumulate your own power in the parts of the countryside that you drive the other side with its scattered forces out of, and begin to establish a whole new regime, a whole new system of power, a revolutionary system of power, piece by piece over increasing parts of the country. In order to effectively make a revolution in a country like this, when it comes down to it, it will be necessary from the beginning to be able to mobilize a massive organized force of people. Thousands and millions, literally, of people organized at the time into a conscious and systematic fighting force. Otherwise, with something less than that, the enemy, with its very developed means of communication and transportation, will be able to move quickly to deal with any small-scale military operation that people try to develop against it, and to crush it. And the experience of this and other countries like this, other imperialist countries, has shown this over and over again. So if you're serious about revolution, you have to recognize what the conditions are and what the necessary strategy is in accordance with the conditions that you actually face. You can't just jump off and do something you want to do because you're impatient. That's a way that you're going to get defeated. If we just made revolution because we wanted it, we could jump off and try to do it tomorrow or yesterday. But if we're serious about it, we have to find the right strategy that actually holds the possibility of winning. And we also have to understand something very important, which I was referring to just before I ended the last part of this. This ruling class that we have over us, this ruthless bunch of mass murderers, and they are that and nothing less, will try and is already trying to portray any kind of revolutionary struggle against them as terrorism. They are trying to wipe out in people's minds and in the popular consciousness the difference between, for example, a people's war in Nepal, which has millions of people actively supporting or involved in it, and something like what Osama bin Laden does, which involves attacks on ordinary people for reactionary purposes, to try to bring about a religious fundamentalist regime that would terrorize and oppress masses of people just in a different form than it's done now. But they will always try to say, and are saying, and are trying to say, that any form of revolutionary struggle, especially one directed against them or against regimes that they want to keep in power, is terrorism. We have to not only fight against that, but we also have to understand what does constitute a genuine revolutionary struggle that has the basis to involve millions of people, which is the only way you can win up against a power like this. And what is a strategy which, even if it's not really terrorism, even if it's an attempt to make revolution in the interests of the people and the interests of ridding society of oppression and exploitation, doesn't really hold the ability to involve and organize millions of people. We have to do nothing less than this if we're serious about actually making revolution and bringing into being all the kinds of things that I'm talking about, which we are desperately hungering for. In a country like this, what's required of us, the path to power here, is to carry out all-around political work in many different forms, including leading people to rise up and resist and rebel against their oppression, to defend themselves against the brutal attacks of the oppressors, and to build up through this their fighting capacity, their organization, and their consciousness, raising their sights higher and higher in the process through all the back and forth of this, until the time comes when, on the one hand, you have a real revolutionary people that has developed through all this. Millions of people in a revolutionary mood, in a fighting mood, determined to fight, put things on the line to get rid of this system. And at the same time, developing together with that, you have a revolutionary crisis in society. And then when those things come together, then it's time to go for power and hold nothing back. In doing so, when such a revolutionary situation, a revolutionary crisis develops and ripens, and a revolutionary people of millions determined to struggle in an all-out way to make revolutionary change, when that comes onto the stage, then the revolution does not consist, the fighting does not consist in small-scale guerrilla battles taking place over a long period of years. It will consist instead of massive battles centered in the urban areas, beginning in the cores of the urban areas where the strongest base for revolution is, and then quickly developing and linking up all over the country. And there will be a need for these mass organized insurrections to take place more or less at the same time. Otherwise, the enemy will be able to organize massive force, bring it to bear, and crush these uprisings one after another. And you can see from this the great importance of what I talked about earlier, of uniting all who can be united for this revolution. Not only is this necessary in terms of the broadest vision of the kind of society and world we're striving to bring into being, but it's also, if you think about what it's going to mean for this revolutionary uprising when it occurs simultaneously in a number of key urban areas, not to be immediately crushed. A big factor is going to be, can this revolutionary force, once it jumps off, can it break out of the urban cores where it begins? Can it move through the outer parts of the city, even through the suburbs and into the outlying areas, in order to link up one urban area with another under revolutionary power and to establish a new revolutionary regime? And the answer to that question will depend to a significant degree on how well the revolutionary vanguard and the masses of people have done in building a broad united front, so that when that revolutionary force moves in that way, there are people there who welcome it and support it and give it assistance and deny assistance to the other side. This will be a decisive question in terms of whether we're able to succeed with revolution. At the time when all this comes on the stage, at the time when it all gets thrown on for resolution, when the whole deal is up, at that time all the consciousness has been raised and all the organization that's been developed among the mass of people linking the party with the masses, all that organization which has had a political character and which has served in a general sense a political, not a military struggle. At that time, in that revolutionary crisis, when the crunch is there, all that organization will be transformed into mass organization for the purpose of fighting and defeating the imperialist armed forces. This has to be the strategic way in which we see this if we're serious about actually doing this. It can be done, but we have to be serious in how we strategically approach this. Everything we do has to be guided by a vision of the future society, of the radically different world that communism represents. All the work we do now must be based on preparing for when a revolutionary crisis in society does erupt, when a situation that holds the possibility of actually making revolution comes into being, so that we do not miss or throw away the opportunity to seize hold of society from the world-class and worldwide thugs and mass murderers who rule it now, the opportunity to set out on the road of revolutionizing all of society and all of the world. As pointed out in our party's draft program, all of our work, guided by this vision and approach, has a definite aim. Simply put, we are working to bring the masses in their millions to the position where they are willing and determined to put everything on the line for revolution, where they grasp both the need and the possibility for revolution. In a little while, I'm going to come back to this and talk more about the question of how such a revolutionary situation could emerge and how the capitalist hold on society could actually be broken. But first, another key question in making revolution, which I've touched on a couple of times and just referred to, is how to unite all the forces that must be and can be united, both in order to have a powerful enough force to actually defeat and overthrow the present oppressive system, and then to be able to carry out the radical transformation of society as a whole. These are not challenges that can be met with just a few people, a few thousand, or even tens or hundreds of thousands. The orientation must be to finally win millions, even tens of millions, to directly take part in or to actively support revolution, and to isolate to the greatest extent possible the ruling class of this system and its die-hard supporters. How can this be done? The answer lies in what our party refers to as the strategic orientation of building a united front under the leadership of the proletariat, or for short, as we sometimes say, the UFULP. Earlier, and once again here, I spoke about the importance of uniting all who can be united in the struggle against the outrages and injustices perpetrated by this system, and against the system overall. This must be done in particular struggles against the system, and it must be the way in which the overall struggle to bring down this system and revolutionize society is approached. And it is crucial to handle well the relation between particular struggles and uniting all who can be united in them, and the larger, higher aim of revolution, and working to bring into being the broadest possible united front for that revolution. And here's some recent experience which did involve literally millions of people, can help get a clearer picture of the importance of uniting all who can be united, and the strategic importance of building the united front under the leadership of the proletariat and its vanguard. Let's look at the mass outpouring of protest and resistance against the war in Iraq once again. There was great significance to this, obviously. Not only did people come forth and protest and demonstrate and rebel, but they opened their minds up to all kinds of new ideas and began to see things in a whole different way, and began to see the system and how it operates and who rules it, at least getting glimmers of that. At the same time, there was a great significance to the outbreaks and outpourings among the youth in this overall situation, especially proletarian youth. The student walkouts, for example, that took place in many cities, including Oakland, Los Angeles, and New York. I have to say, coming from the San Francisco Bay Area, I was thrilled when I saw this whole article in our paper about Castlemont High School. That's a high school in East Oakland that I'm very familiar with. And it's like, I always thought of it as, growing up in terms of track and basketball. And I was thrilled to see that hundreds of youth broke out of there and were talking in terms of not only resisting this war, but beginning to talk about the proletariat and proletarian revolution, at least the more politically advanced among them. This is only a seed, but it's a very important seed that needs to be developed and nurtured. But then some people will say, well, yeah, but all that still didn't stop that war. That's true. And we know why that is. I've talked about that already. Because they have their own interests and because they have a dictatorship and they were determined to carry out that war. But even though it didn't stop the war, let's look at what it did accomplish and what that holds for the future. One of the most important things it accomplished was that these monsters were not able to go into this war with a mantle of justice on their side in the eyes of people all over the world. There's been article after article written in the press in this country bemoaning the fact that here after 9/11, really for the first time in a long time, America, as they portray it, had the sympathy of people all over the world. America's been a symbol and object of hatred for people all over the world, very justifiably for a long, long time. But here after 9/11, there was a lot of sympathy coming forth. And these articles are bemoaning the fact that, well, looks like Bush squandered all that. Now we're back to a situation where everybody hates America all over the world again. And this is in no small part owing to the fact that people did come out and protest this war in advance and expose what it was about. Also, very importantly, to people all over the world who see America as one big monster, undifferentiated, all of the people there together with the government. This began to say to people all over the world, it's not so. There are millions of people in the United States who do not go along with this idea of being the new Rome in the world. There are millions of people who are standing out against the ruling class of this country. There are people you can seek to unite with. And think of the back and forth as this developed over the months between the demonstrations in different countries, as this began to become more and more to the surface and to more and more powerfully stand out. They were denied the mantle of justice. They were denied the ability to get away with saying that what they were doing, they said it, but they were denied the ability for many people to believe that they were waging a war to liberate somebody. And even what happened in the UN was not unrelated to these massive outpourings. Because not only in this country, but in Europe and other places, the fact that millions of people were opposed to this war and came out and demonstrated that, put pressure on the governments there. They have their own interests. You see, France and Germany and so on, they're imperialists themselves, but they don't want to live in a world that's completely run by U.S. imperialism. They have their own interests they want to pursue, and they're not interested in living in that kind of a world. They want their own role in this, and they want to get their own cut in this. And they want to have some say-so and not be simply dictated to by the American imperialists. So there were already some contradictions and friction there. But when there were these mass outpourings, all of a sudden, the French ambassador to the UN had to start sounding like, somebody from Amnesty International. Talking about human rights and how terrible war is. Jacques Chirac had to talk about how war should be the last resort. Yeah, right. But this wasn't unrelated. This wasn't merely deception on their part. This was not unrelated to the mass outpourings that occurred, yes, in this country, but also in countries throughout the world. And that, in turn, had a reaction back on the people. Because when the governments got to fighting in the UN and some of these things got to be said, then more people saw the possibility and perhaps the effect of demonstrating. So all these things are great accomplishments. Just because a war wasn't stopped doesn't mean that tremendous things weren't accomplished. And just because right now people are a little bit quiet, because things have entered another stage doesn't mean they've all gone back to accepting what this is all about and that they won't come forward again. So this shows us potential for uniting people broadly, for the proletariat to build and lead a broad united front reaching broadly even into the middle class in this society. Now at the same time, although some of the people involved in that struggle against that war are open or are getting more open to revolution, maybe even are talking about revolution right now, or at least talking about what would it take to make a whole different kind of world, still for most of the broad numbers of people involved, that's not where they're coming from yet. Again, this doesn't prove that people, even among the middle class, cannot be won in broad numbers to revolution. What it does show very definitely is the need to build the movement more deeply while continuing to broaden it, involving greater and greater numbers of people through all the twists and turns and ebb and flows of this struggle. And it shows the need to consistently and ever more powerfully bring forward the reality that only revolution can put an end to wars like this and all the other injustices and outrages of this system. This requires continually carrying out a policy of unity, struggle, unity, which means we unite with people who stand up against and resist the crimes of this system while we carry out friendly, comradely, and principled struggle over what is the problem and what is the solution. Where do all these outrages come from? And what is necessary to finally put an end to them? And this process of unity, struggle, unity is an ongoing process, developing the unity to a continually more advanced level through the back and forth of this overall process and even the ebbs and flows of this struggle. At the same time, all this shows the need to bring forward much more fully and bring to the forefront of all the people protesting and resisting the forces in society that do have a deep interest in revolution, the people suffering most under the system, and above all, the people whose exploitation is the whole foundation of this system, the millions and millions of proletarians. Once again, this is the class, these are the people who must be the backbone of this revolution. But again, as the other side of this picture, to actually win the revolutionary struggle, and more than that, to bring into being the new kind of world that is possible, the proletariat needs to ally with and to lead broad ranks of people, uniting all who can be united, and through the course of things, leading them in the direction of revolution. And there is an important back and forth here. The more there is dissent, protest, resistance, rebellion among many different sections of society, the more it encourages people at the base of society, the exploited class of proletarian people, to see the possibility of rising up and not just being crushed. The more it strengthens their ability to see the possibility as well as the necessity for an all-the-way revolutionary struggle. When you're sitting there in a housing project or working in a garment center, and it looks like everybody in the society is not doing anything to oppose all the shit you hate all the time, and they're constantly telling you everybody's against you, everybody loves this society, you turn on the news, you turn on the programs on the TV, everything else, it's all telling you how great it is. You're sitting there in that situation, you feel overwhelmed. You might want a radical change, but you don't feel that could ever be possible, because not only is the government against you, but all the people are against you too, and you'll just be smashed if you do anything. But it's a great source of hope and inspiration for the proletarians and other oppressed people in that situation when they see all this massive protest and rebellion going on in society. Just like people in other parts of the world, they start to say, somebody's been lying to us once again. It's not the way they say. Everybody doesn't love this. Everybody isn't going along with this. Even people who have it better than we do have a lot of things they don't like. Maybe we could bring about some kind of change. At the same time, as the force of revolutionary proletarians comes forward in struggle, and the more that this happens, it will in turn give more backbone and a more militant, determined, and more revolutionary-minded character to the protest, resistance, and rebellion throughout society. Once again, we've seen examples of this in the walkouts I referred to of the high school proletarian youth, of oppressed youth. We've also seen it in things like NDP, the National Day of Protest Against Police Brutality. For example, in Los Angeles, they have very powerful demonstrations there on October 22nd every year. And one of the most powerful things is when the buses roll up and the contingent gets off from Watts, and the cry goes up, "Watts in the house," and the youth drum corps breaks out. This has an electrifying effect on people. And it isn't just in LA. In other parts of the country, when proletarians come into the struggle, particularly as this is in a more and more politically conscious way, this also has this kind of effect on others broadly. At least it raises more questions in their minds. It exposes them and gives them dialogue with people who see the evils of this system in a much deeper way and have a much deeper hatred for it and a much stronger desire to change and rise up and abolish the whole thing. Making revolution requires building in the most positive and powerful way on this back and forth process and leading it all the way to the goal of revolution. And we should not fail to recognize the great potential that does exist for uniting literally tens of millions of people against this system. Yes, right in this country. Sometimes from their own viewpoint, people in the enemy camp may recognize and call attention to the problems they face and the strengths we have going for us. And we should learn from that too. I like to tell people that we should take heart from Pat Buchanan. Now, most of you know that Pat Buchanan is a reactionary dog. He's basically one of the faces of fascism in America today. And he wrote this book after the 2000 election called The Death of the West, in which he bemoaned the fact that, among other things, the United States is in growing danger, more and more danger, of becoming a non-white country. And he said things like, he accused European women in the United States, white women, of committing genocide of the white race by refusing to have too many babies, by wanting to have careers and having abortions and practicing birth control. They're engaging in auto-genocide of the white race, he said, in essence. And he talked not only about the U.S., but he talked about Europe, too, where there's this whole phenomenon of people being driven out of these countries in the third world and coming from the Middle East or Turkey into places like France and Germany, and coming in massive numbers from Mexico and Latin America into the United States. And these people, he basically said, reproduce like rabbits. So we've got a real problem here. They're not practicing all this auto-genocide, so pretty soon they're going to be the majority in the society. Well, it's very hard to read. It's very hard to read this book with all of its disgusting racism. I forced myself to read through it. But along with this, he also said something else very interesting and significant that we should really learn from. He wrote most of the book before September 11th, but then he went back and added some parts afterward and wove that into the book. And one of the things he said was, writing shortly after September 11th, he said, look, there's all this massive show of national unity, displays of the flag, people all rallying together, but it won't last. And he went on to say why, and what he said wasn't without any significance or meaning. He said, look, you've got these whole section of people in this society, millions and millions of people, as a result of this horrible thing in the 60s, and everything that's happened as a result of that, who just don't buy into all this shit anymore. They don't believe that America has a right to rule the world. They think this is a racist country that is founded on slavery and genocide. They think women should have the right to abortion and not be enslaved to their husbands. They think homosexuals should be able to run around and do things like ordinary people. They think that students shouldn't have to just learn about the great European civilization, but should learn about other things as well. This is a horrible situation, he said, and there's all these millions of people who just don't believe these things anymore, and this is not going to go away. Well, you should learn from your enemies. You should look for if, do they actually have any insights? And he does. From his point of view, he's pointing at something very real. There are tens of millions of people like this. We know that. They're out there. These are many of the people who are out demonstrating against various things, including this, especially this war against Iraq. Still, as important as that is, we must aim for an even more favorable division in society. We must work to win over even broader numbers of people, including as many as possible from among those who right now do not support revolution or even are strongly opposed to revolution at this point. This will be more possible the more that the fight against oppression and unjust wars and injustice in general grows throughout society. And once again, it will be more possible the more that greater and greater numbers of proletarians themselves are increasingly brought to the forefront as a powerful revolutionary force, conscious of the historic role and mission of the proletariat as a class, as the leading force within the overall resistance against this system, in the fight against all forms of oppression and injustice, and finally in making revolution to overthrow this system and open the door to transforming, to revolutionizing all of society. At the same time, as I have emphasized a number of times in this talk, because this is a point of fundamental importance, the leadership of the proletariat in the revolutionary process overall is made possible and is realized most of all, and can only be realized in the final analysis through its vanguard party and its leadership. As also pointed out in our party's draft program, in playing its vanguard role in leading the masses to make revolution and to remake society, the way the party does this is by applying what we call the mass line. This is an understanding that Mao Zedong developed in the course of the Chinese Revolution, drawing from the experience of previous revolutions. The mass line means basically that you go out among the masses and learn what's on their minds, their thoughts, their insights, their understanding, the way they see the world. You bring back those ideas. You recognize by scientifically looking at it that some of them are correct and some of them are not so correct. But you work to concentrate, to strengthen, to build up what is correct in the understanding of the masses. And on that basis, to develop lines and policies to go back to the masses with, to propagate, to carry out these lines, to popularize them among the masses, and to work with the masses to take up these lines and policies and to carry them out, and then to carry forward the struggle together with the masses, to persevere together with them, as Mao said, to bring these policies into action. Let's take an example of what this means. You're out working among the masses and someone says, the people who run this country, Bush and the rest of them, are just a bunch of big-time criminals and mass murderers. So far, so good. But then they add, but they're going to get theirs. They're going to be punished in the end. God will take care of that. Well, here you have to divide things into two, as we say. You have to distinguish, you have to pick out what is correct in what they're saying and unite with it. And as I said, develop lines and policies that unite with that and take that back to people in a higher form that they can take up and build struggle around. You have to develop programs and policies and means of struggle that unite with what is advanced and correct in people's understanding and that will enable them to act to move things forward while continuing to carry out struggle over what they do not yet understand correctly or fully. Again, what's involved here is a process of unity, struggle, unity. Applying the mass line is an ongoing process of learning and leading, of learning from the masses in order to better lead them, of learning while leading, as well as leading while learning. Now, another important point is that within the broader united front that must be built for revolution in the U.S., there is a key and strategic alliance, what we call a solid core of the united front that must be built. This solid core is the alliance between the struggle of the proletariat of all nationalities to end all exploitation, uniting with the struggles of oppressed nationalities, the black, Puerto Rican, Chicano, Asian, Native American, and other oppressed peoples, fighting to end their oppression as peoples. The strategic importance of this alliance, of forging and strengthening this solid core, has to do with the particular character of the United States as a country in which the brutal and even genocidal oppression of whole peoples has been such a key and fundamental part of its entire history and historical development, and a key and fundamental part of the present-day reality of the American capitalist imperialist system. Ending national oppression, the oppression of peoples who are discriminated against, brutalized, and denied their basic rights as peoples. Ending all this can never be done under this system. If it could have been, they would have done it a long time ago. They've had plenty of time. And as I said before, white supremacy and the oppression of whole peoples is built into the very foundation of this system. And of course, ending the exploitation of the proletariat, the class whose exploitation is at the very foundation of the whole capitalist system. This can never be achieved under this system. At the same time, the proletariat can never emancipate itself. It can never put an end to the conditions and relations that are the basis for its exploitation, except by fighting for the emancipation of all humanity, by taking up the fight to end all exploitation and oppression. Without that, the proletariat will always remain enslaved and exploited. And especially in the United States, a crucial part of this fight to end all oppression is the struggle to abolish national oppression in any and every form. The struggles of the oppressed peoples, the oppressed nationalities, and of the proletariat of all nationalities overlap and are bound together by many threads. But at the same time, there are separate struggles. These struggles develop separately because people fight back against their oppression even before they become fully aware of the source of this oppression and all the ways in which this is connected to other things in society and in the world as a whole. And we would never build a revolutionary movement, and certainly never overthrow the whole system of oppression and exploitation. We could never do that if we tried to tell people who are oppressed not to fight back until they had this full understanding, or to wait until everyone else recognized that they were oppressed and had a right to fight back. We would never get anywhere doing that. Certainly we would never get to revolution. So different struggles against oppression develop somewhat separately and unevenly, even though they all do have the same source, the capitalist imperialist system, and the same solution, socialist revolution with the final goal of communism. Linking together these different struggles and developing them into a powerful revolutionary movement aiming for this solution is in fact exactly the challenge and the task of the vanguard party of the proletariat. Large numbers of the oppressed nationalities are proletarians, but there are also other classes represented among the oppressed nationalities. Middle-class professionals, small business owners, and so on, and even some owners of big businesses. These different classes have in common the fact that they are subjected to national oppression, but they also have different interests and different viewpoints because of their different class positions. A businessman, like the head of BET, for example, does not have the same interests and does not see things the same way as someone living in a housing project and trying to make it somehow working somewhere like McDonald's. This shows again why it is crucial both to develop the struggle against national oppression and to unite in this struggle people from many different classes among the oppressed nationalities, as well as overall in society, and why it is crucial to develop and strengthen the role of the revolutionary proletariat in this struggle. The proletariat must be brought forward through the leadership of its vanguard party as the most determined and most powerful force fighting against national oppression. As our party's draft program explains, we must work at this from two sides. This means, on one side, uniting with and building the struggles of the oppressed nationalities while struggling to bring the outlook and program of the revolutionary proletariat to the forefront in these struggles. And from the other side, and most fundamentally, it means building the movement of the proletariat of all nationalities as a revolutionary struggle to end all oppression, with the fight to end national oppression a key part of this. And as a key part of doing that, it is necessary to win white people among the proletariat, as well as white people in society as a whole, to have a deep understanding of and a deep hatred for national oppression and racism, and to be consistent and determined fighters against this. All of this oppression and exploitation is rooted in the basic nature of the capitalist imperialist system. And all of this oppression and exploitation can only be ended by overthrowing this system and moving forward to revolutionize all of society and the whole world. That is the basis for building the solid core of the United Front, for building the broader United Front overall, and for bringing the revolutionary proletariat to the front ranks of this historic struggle to abolish and move beyond all this. This solid core and the broader United Front, under the leadership of the proletariat, represent a tremendous potential power for revolution. It represents turning back against this system, the 1,000 ways in which it oppresses and brutalizes masses of people within the U.S. itself and all over the world. Now let's go back to the big question: how a revolutionary situation can come about, how a revolution could actually be made right within the belly of the beast, in the U.S. itself. With their wild ambitions and their goal of imposing their domination throughout the world, the ruling class of U.S. imperialists is also going to find itself having to spread its forces of aggression and occupation in many places, all over the world. Indeed, they are already setting out to do that. But this will not be, and we can see that it already is not, all smooth sailing for them. It is full of difficult contradictions and potential dangers for them, including the danger for them of getting overextended, tied down in too many parts of the world at one time. This danger for them can also be a great opportunity for the revolutionary people all over the world, and yes, within the belly of the beast itself. Let's look again at what's happening right now in Iraq. Bush declared the war over and won. Came zooming in and landed down, got on the aircraft carrier and gave his little swaggering speech. But what's happened since? Yes, they won that war in that stage. Yes, they imposed their rule at this point. But even after they won the war, look at the problems they're having with their occupation. Resistance is mounting against it in many different forms. Now, right now, of course, this is not a revolutionary resistance in the sense that it's led by the proletariat and its vanguard, but it's a very important resistance coming from many different places in that society and causing all kinds of problems for the imperialists, including causing them to start fighting more among themselves. How come we didn't have a strategy for what we were going to do after we won the war? This calls to mind, once again, the important principle and profound truth that Mao spoke about. Where there is oppression, there will be resistance. And we're seeing this in a very living way in Iraq. We don't know where it'll go. We don't know how it's all going to end up. But it shows the kind of thing that can and will happen the more they move to try to impose their American diktat, their rule, their domination throughout the world, and what this will require them to do. And at the same time, the way in which the U.S. government is more and more using funds for these military purposes, while also adopting policies to benefit the very rich at the expense of the rest of society, the way in which they are driving millions and millions of people in the U.S. into more desperate poverty, while making the situation of tens of millions of others less secure, all this too can turn into a great problem for the ruling class and can deepen discontent and fan greater resistance over time. Even something like this spectacle in California with the recall election is not unrelated to this. These forces grouped around Bush and that similar forces have been are trying to carry off this recall in order to position themselves for the next election as part of an overall strategy where in their minds the Republican Party is going to rule the American imperialist system for time from now forward. This is their strategy. And one of the things they're playing on is the fact that the economy in California is in such terrible shape. But a lot of that is related to policies that Bush has carried out on the federal level and other things that these same right-wing forces has done in California over decades, cutting back on taxes for public services, and also the whole thing with Enron and all the rest where they bankrupted the state of California, blackmailing them essentially over energy over the last couple of years. So now we get this phenomenon where, yeah, I want to be the people's governor of California. No more California should be ruled by special interests. But this is just one example of the contradictions that they're embroiled in themselves and how everything is not smooth sailing for them and how even the policies they're implementing, even when they come out in this kind of form, nevertheless reflect deeper things that are affecting millions and even tens of millions of people in various ways. What is happening internationally that they have to deal with, combined with what is happening within the U.S. itself, and rebellion and resistance here, combined with different conflicts, and most of all, massive resistance, rebellion, and revolutionary struggle and revolutionary wars throughout the world that they will have to try to deal with. All this can come together to plunge them into a real crisis. And let's look at their great military power. It is very awesome. There's no point in ignoring that or trying to just slide around it. But all military power has to rest on a foundation. A material foundation of an economy and a political foundation that gives it legitimacy in the eyes of the masses of people. As I touched on earlier, all ruling classes claim for themselves the monopoly of legitimate force and violence, the monopoly of legitimate power and force and violence to back up that power. If at any time a ruling class begins to lose legitimacy in the eyes of the masses of people broadly, not in the eyes of a few radicals, but in the eyes of the masses of people broadly, if that loss of legitimacy occurs as things develop, and as occurs as the struggle against this system broadens and deepens, then they have real problems, even with their massive, destructive military force and machinery of slaughter and destruction. Any military force that is losing legitimacy on a broad basis is a force that can crack apart, especially when it is seriously challenged. Let's look, for example, at the experience of the Vietnam War. Here was a situation where they sent tens of thousands after hundreds of thousands of troops into Vietnam, reaching a level of 500,000 troops. I know we have veterans of that war here today, and they can tell you and can learn more generally what happened to that army. It's like all armies that are basically the enforcement of bully rule. When they went over there first and pounded the Vietnamese people and expected they could win quickly, their morale was relatively high. But as they got bogged down in the jungles and the mountains there, as they faced a people that no matter how much they had to sacrifice, refused to give up and kept on coming back and fighting them, as it was not the kind of war they could quickly overwhelm and pulverize an enemy, they began to lose heart and become demoralized and become angry. Angry at their own officers, angry at the politicians who'd sent them there, alienated, even radicalized. There were hundreds of newspapers of a radical kind directed at GIs during the height of the Vietnam War. There were organizations of GIs opposing that war. There were other things that went on where GIs rebelled as individuals and even as whole units against their officers who tried to send them out into battle. And sometimes the officers suffered for trying to send them out into battle. Even the mainstream media. Now, you know, I don't believe in their polls, but this one was interesting. Because their polls generally are a device for telling you what you're supposed to think by telling you it's what you already do think. Or by telling you that everybody else thinks that way, so you might as well go along in any case. But this poll was particularly interesting. They did a poll in the late 60s of soldiers, and in particular black soldiers in the U.S. military, at the height of the Vietnam War and the height of the upsurge in the 60s. And more than any other figure or political leader in the U.S. at that time, when these soldiers were asked, whom do you look to as a political leader, more of them named leaders of the Black Panther Party than anybody else. So this gives you an example of the kind of thing that can happen when their soldiers begin to run into difficulties and begin to lose faith and belief in the mission that they've been assigned, and the lies begin to stick out. Again, we should learn from our enemies. Henry Kissinger wrote his memoirs of the White House when he was the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State under Nixon and then Ford, but especially Nixon. He talked about the situation that developed in the late 60s and early 70s. He said because of the Vietnam War and everything that was happening in this country, those of us who are the legitimate rulers of the country began to lose confidence. I'm paraphrasing, but this is the essence of it. I'm not lying. So we began to lose confidence. We began to lose direction. And in this situation of a political vacuum that resulted, a small radical minority began to gain the initiative. Now, what he's talking about as a small radical minority was actually millions and millions of people who were alienated and rebelling and protesting in various ways against what was going on. But this is very significant, and we should learn from this. Everything that could have been made, perhaps, wasn't made out of that at that time. But it shows you how a situation like that can develop. When they become politically paralyzed, when the forces they can normally rely on, even their own military, become much less reliable, and when they themselves begin to lose self-confidence or to cast about for what to do, in that kind of a political situation, a quote-unquote radical minority, that is, a revolutionary vanguard and masses of people it's leading, can come forward and can make revolution. And the next time this happens, it needs to go all the way. There is a real possibility of disaffection and demoralization among their military even today, and as things further unfold, especially as they further unfold. Their soldiers can lose confidence in what they are doing. They can lose faith in those who are ordering them to do things. This can happen especially when it becomes apparent to the soldiers and their armed forces that the way things really are is not at all the way they have been told. And especially when they get into a situation where it is not so easy to just quickly pulverize an enemy with overwhelming force. This happened to some extent even in the wars in which they have achieved rather quick and overwhelming victory, including even the first war against Iraq in 1991. And now with the latest war against Iraq, and especially, as I said, with the occupation of Iraq after the victory in that war, and with the tours of duty of these troops being extended beyond what they were told they would be. One of the things that's been most hushed up and covered over in the media and in this country generally is the protests of various kinds that have been carried out by military families. When Bush and other officials have showed up, they've run some of these military officers out of meetings because they're... Now, this is not highly developed political consciousness. It's certainly not revolutionary consciousness. It's obviously, at a minimum, extremely contradictory. But it shows the potential for things. I remember a movie that was made in the late 70s called Friendly Fire. And it was about this family from Iowa who owned, the classic Iowa farm family with the cornfields and everything. And their son went to Vietnam. And he was killed in Vietnam. And they tried, in order to sort of come to peace with this, to find out why this son had died and how he died. And they couldn't find out. The more they asked, the more the government seemed to be covering it up and creating a mystery out of it, or just not letting information come out. And finally, after pushing and pushing and pushing, they found out that their son had been killed by what's called friendly fire. That is, fire from his own American troops who accidentally fired on them and killed them. Fired on his unit and killed him and some other soldiers. But there was a very powerful and important scene in this movie that holds a lesson we should really think about. At one point in this movie, as this family got more and more angry and alienated by this, they started going and meeting with groups who were more opposed to the Vietnam War than they were. And they began to be influenced by this. And there's one scene where the father, this very mainstream, conservative family farm man from Iowa, goes to the graveyard where his son is buried, leans over and picks up the American flag by his son's grave and carries it off and throws it away. Now this represents not the most radical consciousness, but it represents even the loss of allegiance among these middle strata, among people who've formerly been very loyal. And this is the kind of thing that can happen, and we see glimmers of this now, even though we can't say it's fully developed or anything like fully ripened. But it shows potential. While at this point, this has not led to any real or deep crisis in their military, as I said, it has pointed to the potential for that, particularly in a situation where things are much more difficult for them, where they are in a real quagmire. That is, a situation in which it isn't easy for them to get out, but staying in means getting stuck deeper and deeper. Here again, while it is not likely that a situation almost exactly like the Vietnam War will arise in the same way again, that experience holds many important lessons, particularly in terms of what can happen when their armed forces do get into some kind of a serious quagmire. And at those times when these imperialists have big interests and big commitments on the line, which they cannot easily give up or back away from, it is in times like this that it can stand out much more sharply that their interests are very different from, and in fact opposed to, those of the masses of people. If this develops into a serious crisis, then the masses of people can more readily be won to see that their most fundamental interests and their most deeply felt aspirations and needs can only be fully realized and served by ridding themselves of this ruling class and the system and interest it upholds. Now, with all this, and even with the deepest crisis and a real revolutionary situation, there will still be the need to defeat the attempts of this murderous ruling class to use its armed forces, or at least those armed forces that are still loyal to it, to crush the people and drown in blood the people's uprising for a better world. There's no way to get around that. The point, however, is to prepare politically in an all-around way for such a revolutionary situation, and to work so that the difference between the interests of the imperialists and the interests of the masses of people stands out as sharply as possible, so as to have the best possible circumstances for mobilizing and organizing masses of people to fight with determination and daring, as well as with wisdom and strategy, to not only resist bloody repression by the imperialists, but to actually defeat them and to take power from them. When things develop to this point, as I've written before, masses of people, when they get in a revolutionary mood, must not be left without a leadership, and they must not be left without a way to win. To refer again to our party's draft program, the general outlines and features of a revolutionary situation involve three basic factors. First, a serious crisis in society and in government. Second, mass upheaval and rebellion among the proletariat and other sections of the people. And third, a vanguard party capable of turning the mass upheaval and rebellion into an organized insurrection and giving it overall leadership and guidance. Also, a very important element of this is something pointed to by Lenin. Lenin noted that much of the time, and usually in so-called normal times, the masses of people in their great majority allow themselves to be robbed and oppressed and don't see a way out of this when the system is stable and rolling along. This is something we also know only too well from our own experience. But when the weight of oppression becomes so heavy, when the injustices and outrages of the system are just too much to bear, people erupt in protest, rebellion, uprising. And to emphasize this crucial point again, when there are big things up in the world, when the ruling class of imperialists has big interests at stake and becomes heavily committed to them, then it can stand out more and more sharply how the interests of that ruling class are fundamentally different from and opposed to those of the ordinary people. Once again, this was very dramatically the case in the whole build-up to the recent war against Iraq, where the regime in power in the U.S., with the approval or at least the acceptance of the rest of the politicians and opinion makers, was determined to go to war and did go to war, even in the face of a massive opposition that has rarely, if ever, been seen before in circumstances like that. In times such as this system is forced to reveal more of its real features and its real ugly nature. And especially in a situation where the ruling class runs into real difficulties that it cannot easily find a way out of, when it gets into crisis and the powers that be are much more at each other's throats, and their differences are breaking powerfully into the open, and even causing some serious paralysis within their own ranks, then the deep discontent and the rage of masses of people, and at the same time their desire to be rid of oppression and their determination to put an end to it, all this can erupt 10, 100 times more powerfully. And if this can be coordinated, channeled, and led in a unified revolutionary direction by the vanguard party of the proletariat, standing at the head of a powerful and growing revolutionary movement of proletarians and others who have taken up the stand and viewpoint of the revolutionary proletariat, and from that position leading growing numbers of people from throughout society. If the vanguard can bring all this together in a coordinated and organized way around its basic revolutionary program, then the possibility of revolution becomes immediate and real. Yes, even within the belly of this most powerful and monstrous imperialist beast. Now, before moving to a conclusion, I want to answer some further questions about revolution and speak to some objections about what I've laid out here. Some people see the problem not as the whole system in the way that I have talked about it, but as the corporations and the way that the corporations have too much power and influence over things. But the fact is that it is impossible to reform capitalism to do away with big corporations or to curb them and their influence in society. As I've talked about, capitalism always leads to monopoly, to big banks and other financial interests and corporations controlling large parts of the economy in a particular country and in large parts of the world. Even if all the corporations in the world were broken up tomorrow, so long as the capitalist system stayed in effect, new corporations, new monopolies would be formed again before very long. Think back to what was said earlier about the basic features and natures of capitalism, and in particular the production and exchange of commodities and the anarchy this involves. In these circumstances, those capitalists who are more favorably positioned and more ruthless in exploiting their workers and in competing with other capitalists, they will win out, and others will go under or perhaps be swallowed up by the winners. Today, look around you. Even billionaires can get taken over and pushed aside by even bigger sharks. Look at Ted Turner, for example. He founded this whole empire of network, the Turner Network Television, CNN Headline, TBS, TNT. Had this whole gigantic empire in the communications industry. But as other monopolies moved into the field, he felt the need to go and try to gather together even more capital to be able to compete with them. So he merged with Time Warner. I just saw they got rid of the AOL in their name. So it's either Time Warner, or AOL, whatever you like. But AOL's still in there, even if not in the name. But Ted Turner had to go merge with Time Warner to bring in billions of dollars or more capital, even from his position, in order to be able to compete with these other gigantic financial institutions moving in. And what happened to Ted Turner? He's not even in Turner anymore. They gave him a meaningless position as a vice president, and then they shoved him aside altogether. But it's not just corporations or monopolies by themselves. There is a whole system of capitalism, imperialism, that works and that can only work in the way it does. And there is a class which rules this system, even while different capitalists struggle among themselves over how this rule should be exercised and over which capitalist or group of capitalists should have a more favored position within this. The rule of this class of capitalists cannot be overcome a little at a time or piece by piece. To overcome this rule based on exploitation and oppression, it is necessary to deal with the capitalist state, the machinery of the capitalist class for ruling through force and violence. Without breaking the power of the repressive state, the domination of the capitalists over society can never be ended. Now let's look at an example in the world today, a glaring example of this kind of thing. Let's look at the country of Brazil. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Preaching from a Pulpit of Bones. And one of the things I pointed out there was I was polemicizing against this religious guy, Jim Wallace, who's arguing for these kind of peaceful, piecemeal changes. And he told this whole story in his book and upheld it as a model of how these peasants were about ready to be evicted from their land in Brazil, probably back in the 70s. And there's a certain amount of male chauvinism in this too, and patriarchy, because he talked about how the wives of the peasants went and talked to the wives of the senators in Brazil, and the wives of the people in the Senate in Brazil talked to their husbands and got them to do something to keep these particular peasants from being evicted from their land. And he said, this shows you what can be done. Well, in doing research and then writing this book, I pointed out, well, that's a nice story. We don't know what finally happened to those peasants, but we can guess. Because in the same time period that this was going on, 15 million peasants were driven off their land in Brazil. And a lot of these forces in the anti-globalization movement today who don't really understand the nature of the system point to things like Brazil and say, well, now here's a great example of how we can build the anti-globalization struggle without taking power in society. Because look, in Brazil, the people in the local areas can actually have some say-so over the local budgets of the government there. So here you have a situation where these gigantic forces of imperialism and big land ownership in Brazil are working, grinding the people down. Brazil has the greatest disparity, the greatest difference in the entire world in terms of land ownership. How much is land is owned by big landowners versus how much is still owned by little small-holding peasants. The greatest disparity, the greatest difference in the whole world, and millions of peasants are still being ruined and driven into the slums of Brazil. You can read a book or see the movie The City of God to see what this leads to and the horrors that it brings about when people are put in this situation. But the people can affect the local budget. These massive forces are crushing and ruining them, but they can argue about the local budget while all this is going on. This is like someone coming along saying, I'm going to round you all up and put you all in jail for a lifetime, but you can have some say-so about what kind of toilet you have in your cell. This is never a way we're going to get free or change the fundamental conditions of the masses of people. This dramatically illustrates the point that Maoists constantly point to. And that is the fundamental truth and principle that without state power, all is illusion. As long as they have state power, as long as they enforce their system, as long as they have state power, as long as their system is enforced and in effect, these larger forces, like what's operating in Brazil and country after country in the world, will continue to grind up and eat up and spit out masses of people. Now this gets to a big thing that many people raise. Why not bring about change peacefully? Why not follow the path of Gandhi in India or Mandela in South Africa, the path of Martin Luther King or someone like Cesar Chavez? First, let's keep in mind the nature of this system and those who rule it. Everything that I've spoken to from the beginning and throughout this talk, all of experience throughout the world and throughout history, shows that ruling classes like this will not allow any kind of fundamental change peacefully. It shows that they have used and will continue to use the most bloody and bloodthirsty means that they can to try to beat down any attempt at serious change. And certainly this is true of any real revolution, any struggle to wrest power from them and to radically change all of society and the world, which they now dominate and exploit and are determined to continue dominating and exploiting. In discussing this, we have to get to a very basic point. People raise, but violence is degrading. All violence is degrading. It makes you into the very thing that you're fighting against. This is simply not true. Let's look at different kinds of violence and see if they're all the same. Let's say you're out on the street and somebody pulls out a knife, robs you and cuts you up and leaves you bleeding. That's one kind of violence that's degrading and oppressive. But let's say you go to a doctor and the doctor discovers that you have stomach cancer. And the doctor says you need an operation and you say, okay, you go in the operating room, they put you under anesthesia and the doctor cuts you open. That's bloody. There's blood all over the place. Go to an operating room if you don't believe me. That's a form of violence. There's blood all over the place. They're cutting you open too. But it's very different than the person who robs you and cuts you on the street. One of them is taking away something from you and taking away some of your humanity. Another one is saving your life. But let's look at an even more clear example. I talked earlier about these horrendous examples of lynching and rape. Well, let's say that you were living in the South in this period when all these lynchings were going on. And you were with a group of people, and you came upon a crowd that had taken someone like a Claude Neal or a Haynes Turner or a Mary Turner, and they were getting ready, for example, to burn Mary Turner alive. And there were a group of you there. Would you say, oh, I can't do anything about that. I can't get people together here. I can't even go get guns and put a stop to this, because if I did that, I'd be just as degraded as the people who are carrying out this lynching. You'd be a fool to say something like that. You'd be very, very misguided at the very best. And you would let a horrible thing happen in the name of not becoming what you're fighting. But you're not becoming what you're fighting by stopping a lynching. You're doing something radically different. And of course, much better. Or how about a rape? Let's say you round a corner. It's dark at night. You hear a cry and you run over and you see a woman being attacked and raped. And you say, well, I can't do anything about that because I'd have to use violence to stop that. This rapist has shown that he's determined not to stop. He's got a knife or a gun. He's going to go ahead with this. He's telling me to get the fuck out of here or he'll shoot me. But I can't do anything about that because I don't want to become like the rapist. If I use violence to stop that rapist, I'll be just as bad as... No. That's crazy. And anybody can see that that's crazy. Those different kinds of violence have very different content and different meaning. One of them is enforcing oppression and degradation. The other is moving to free people from oppression and degradation. They're not at all the same, and they're not all degrading. One is degrading and one is uplifting. Violence to throw off oppression, to make revolution, is not at all the same. It's very different, radically different than violence to maintain and enforce oppression. Now, I'm not talking about any old kind of violence. Here people just run off and do things crazy, or especially commit violence against each other. We've had way too much of that, and that serves them way too much. I'm talking about resistance and rebellion against oppression. And most of all, I'm talking about a real, conscious, organized, revolutionary struggle to end the system which perpetrates and perpetuates this oppression and degradation over and over and over again. Now let's talk about what did and what did not happen in India with Gandhi. The mythology that we're told is that Gandhi led this mass, non-violent, peaceful struggle which finally forced the English colonialists to give up in India and to give the Indian people their own rule over their own country. That's a fabrication and a myth that's been perpetuated by the very colonialists and imperialists. How did India become nominally, in words only, independent? The fact is that as a result of World War II, British colonialism was too weakened to hang on to much of its empire. You know how they used to brag, the British colonialists? Our empire is so great that the sun never sets on it. When the sun is setting in Ireland, it's rising in Egypt and India. So the sun never sets on our empire. It's so great and stretches over so much of the world. And now they're reduced to foggy old, gray, dreary England. Their empire, they're still trying to fuck around in the world, and they're still imperialists, but they don't have an empire that the sun never sets on. In fact, they hardly ever see the sun. But when faced with this situation, the British colonialists decided that the only way they could pursue their imperialist interests was by completely hitching their wagon to American imperialism. Have you ever noticed how every time U.S. imperialism does anything, if nobody else in the entire world supports it, the British will support it? They got the big dog and the little chihuahua running side by side. Woof, woof, woof. Yip, 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 yip. Because after World War II, when it recognized that it was too weakened to pursue its own imperialist interests in the same way it had before, the English ruling class in its great majority decided, let's become junior partners running alongside the U.S. And as part of this whole thing, in the face of a massive anti-colonial struggle that was developing throughout all the formerly colonized world, they decided to change the form of imperialist domination in India, grant it formal independence, fuck up everybody by creating Pakistan as an Islamic country and India as a supposed Hindu country and all this other mess, and basically allow the U.S. imperialists to come in and have domination over it, with the English getting their cut in there as junior partners. That's what actually happened. What Gandhi did not lead to independence. It had nothing to do with what actually resulted after World War II. And it certainly was not the reason why the British colonialists stepped back and let the U.S. imperialists come in, and why India ever since, down to today, has been fought over and ravaged by different competing imperialist powers, particularly the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And now that the Soviet Union is gone in that form, the U.S. in particular is ravaging India still. And what's happening inside of India? What are the conditions like there for the masses of people? All the kinds of things that I talked about that exist in Nepal, for example, for the women, also hold true in India. And for the masses of people, particularly the peasants in the countryside, their conditions are horrendous. The oppression, the poverty, the exploitation, the domination by larger interests and by imperialism is horrendous. It has never been relieved. It has never been certainly abolished by anything that Gandhi did. It has continued for decades, right down to today, since World War II. Look at some of the things that go on in India. For example, the situation of women once again. Here is a perverse situation where you get this combination of extreme high-tech and extremely backward oppressive conditions linked together. What happens in India, all over the country, for example, is that high-tech means of ultrasound are used during the pregnancy of a woman to determine if the baby is going to be a boy or a girl. And if it's going to be a girl, there's tremendous pressure to abort it because girls are considered of less value than boys and really of not much value at all. Now, this is very different than the right of women on their own to decide to have an abortion in order to be able to take part freely in society. In fact, this form of killing fetuses that are girls once they're determined to be girls is all part of the same package of oppression of women that goes along with denying women the right to abortion. But this is an extremely backward form of it in India. And this is just one sign of what the conditions are like for the 1 billion people or so that live in India down to today. Gandhi changed none of that. Well, look at the caste system in India. Today they still have the caste system. You can read books and novels about it. The horrendous things that are done to people, and even though it's supposed to be done away with, the horrendous things that are done to people in the so-called untouchable castes, if they dare to come into contact with or to do things out of order in relation to people of a higher caste. I won't even go into some of the details. Read about it. It's tremendously oppressive and degrading. None of this has been changed in India. None of what Gandhi did had any effect on this. It's a mythology that's been created to tell people that this is the way you can change things when it's a dead end and a trap for people. And the same is true in South Africa, even after Nelson Mandela became president there. Apartheid, a system of open segregation and terror against the African people, has been formally abolished. It's gone in that form, but white supremacy and imperialist domination have remained, and in some ways have even been strengthened. Land and the rich resources in and under the land have remained in the hands of rich white owners and imperialists, who together still hold the real power in South Africa, even though members of the African National Congress may be elected to the presidency. The conditions of the masses of people, of African people in that country, farmers deprived of land or forced to remain on dirt-poor land, miners, and millions living in urban slums and shanty towns, their conditions have remained the same or have even gotten worse. Now, Arundhati Roy, a brilliant writer from India, who is also an activist in the fight against imperialism, or empire as she calls it, has also painted a vivid picture of this. In a speech earlier this year at the Riverside Church in Harlem, she pointed out that after Nelson Mandela's African National Congress became the party in office in South Africa, they bowed to the imperialist system, its international market, and its international institutions of financial control. And the result is that this has, in Arundhati Roy's words, increased the hideous disparities between the rich and the poor. More than 1 million people have lost their jobs. 10 million South Africans, almost a quarter of the population, have been disconnected from water and electricity. 2 million have been evicted from their homes. Meanwhile, a small white minority that has been historically privileged by centuries of brutal exploitation is more secure than ever before. It's apartheid with a clean conscience, and it goes by the name of democracy. This is a very insightful comment by Arundhati Roy. It gets very much to the truth of things. Now, I should say that Roy does not recognize, at least not yet, the kind of revolution that is really needed to change all this fundamentally. But the way in which she is contributing to the exposure of the conditions of the people and the crimes of the system is very valuable. And hopefully she and many others like her will more and more come to see the need for and embrace communist revolution, which is the only thing that can actually lead to abolishing these horrendous things and bringing about real liberation for the oppressed all over the world. Well, what about what was done by Cesar Chavez, and where did that lead? Most of you know that Cesar Chavez was a leader of the farm workers during the 60s. The conditions of the farm workers in California and other places at that time were horrific. Working in the fields long hours, brutally oppressed, denied basic rights, discriminated against, not even allowed to have a union. And a massive movement did develop in which Cesar Chavez played a leading role. And this movement drew broad support from Chicanos and Latinos throughout society, and even more broadly among people who stand up for justice and against oppression. And some changes were made, and the union was won there, and some rights were recognized, and some conditions were bettered for a short time for a section of the farm workers. But in order to prove that he was working within the mainstream, and that by working within the mainstream you could improve the conditions of some of the workers, following that strategy, Cesar Chavez was forced to do horrible things. One of the most horrible is that he actually turned in illegal immigrants in the fields in order to try to win legitimacy in the eyes of the ruling class for his union. And this led down a certain path. And what are the conditions of the farm workers today? We just had an article in the most recent issue of our paper about the conditions in the fields. A group of writers went to Fresno and interviewed farm workers. The conditions are the same or worse as they were once Cesar Chavez first began that movement. And what happened with Martin Luther King? He insisted once again on the path of nonviolence, at least for the people fighting against oppression. And this led him to do terrible things too. For example, during the urban rebellions of the 1960s, Martin Luther King actually called and signed a letter to the President, Johnson, calling on the army and troops to be sent in to put down these rebellions. And what happened when the army and federal troops came in to put down these rebellions? Let's look at Detroit in 1967, one of the greatest rebellions of the time. I talked earlier about even the concessions it wrenched out of the auto companies. But the other side of this is when the army came in and together with the police, they didn't just shoot people down on the street. They rounded people up and murdered them in cold blood. Some of this took place in a motel called the Algiers Motel near Detroit. They took people there and lined them up and executed a number of them in cold blood for taking part in the rebellion. This is what will always happen if you call for the army of the oppressors to come in and put down the uprising of the people, because you have the view that any kind of violence by the oppressed people will either degrade them or will put them in a situation where the full force of the state will come down on them, so you call for the state to come down on them. But as Mao Zedong pointed out, even with all this, and even though he was an advocate of nonviolence, the system did not spare Martin Luther King. They assassinated him. And what is the situation of the Chicano people and the black people today? Yes, there are some more sections of the middle class that have developed, but for a large section of the people, the conditions are the same or worse than they were in the 60s. And a revolution remains to be made to sweep away the system that holds them in these conditions. So we can see once again that the path of so-called peaceful resistance as a strategy, as the means and the limits of struggle to change things, not as a tactic here and there, but as a strategy and as the means and limits that are insisted upon in the struggle, that this cannot lead to the radical and profound changes that are needed. It cannot lead to real and complete liberation, to an overturning of all of society, to a whole different world and future for the masses of people and for humanity as a whole. Now, still another thing that some people say is this: Well, you say it's the system of capitalism that is the problem and that it must be done away with. But isn't the real problem people themselves and the fact that people are messed up? Isn't the problem human nature? Don't we have to change people, change their thinking before there can really be a big change in society? Aren't people just too fucked up? You hear this all the time because this idea is pumped into people's heads. Now, talking about human nature, the simple fact is there is no such thing as human nature in the way people mean it. That is, there is not one human nature. There is not some uniform and unchanging way that everybody is and how everybody sees the world. Human nature has different meanings in different times and for different classes and groups in society. For example, let's go back to slavery. What would be considered very natural by a slave owner would not at all be seen as natural to a slave. The idea that the slave should be docile, go along with slavery, that's in their nature, would not at all be acceptable to the slaves. But that would seem to perfectly conform to human nature in the viewpoint of a slave owner. Or talking about human nature and how people see things and what they do. Let's look at the peasants in China before the Revolution won and afterward. Before the Revolution won in China, the peasants owned small plots of land. They tried to eke out a meager existence. They suffered starvation in the tens of millions, which they never tell you about, by the way. Everything was perfect in China until Mao came along, in case you didn't know. But they suffered starvation in the millions and tens of millions, and they were so poor and so faced with the danger of starvation every day that they literally used to stay up every night, have a member of the family stay up all night to guard their own individual plot from their neighbors so their neighbors didn't come and steal something from their plot. After the revolution, the people worked together cooperatively, and then they collectivized the land and worked together on a higher basis and improved their lives and changed the society. What was the human nature involved? The human nature was in one set of conditions they had to act one way, but once they got rid of those conditions, they began to be able to act another way. Or look at what I talked about in Nepal. Look at the conditions people were faced with before the Revolutionary War developed and before the revolution was able to seize power in parts of the country. Look what the people had to do. It was considered natural in human nature for women to be docile and to be subordinate to men. No more. One kind of human nature flows from and corresponds to and is propagated in relation to, and people are brainwashed with the idea in relation to one set of conditions, but another kind of so-called human nature comes to the fore and flourishes in a different set of conditions. Now, it's not the masses of people who have made this system they are forced to live under. It is a system that makes people relate to it and relate to each other in certain ways. People do not get to just choose any system they want. Although, by rising up against the system, people can begin to change themselves, and they can lay the foundation for finally overthrowing the system and then radically changing all of society, including the way people see things and how they understand the world. And when conditions become ripe, people do get the opportunity to choose a different system. That is, to change the whole system through a revolutionary struggle and a revolutionary transformation. This is the era of history that we're living in, when such a revolutionary change, in fact, the greatest revolutionary change in the history of humanity, is now possible. Now, it is important to change people's minds, to change how they see things, to raise their consciousness, in other words, to do this as much as possible at every point. There is great importance to exposure of this system and to giving people a scientific, revolutionary understanding of the world and how to change it. And in this we can see the tremendous importance of our party's newspaper, The Revolutionary Worker, bringing the truth to people about society and world events, exposing the crimes of the system, celebrating the resistance of the people, but more than that, showing how the outrages and injustices people are protesting and rebelling against all stem from this same system, bringing out how different classes and groups in society respond to these events, and struggles, and how this shows their strengths and weaknesses in relation to the revolutionary struggle to overthrow and abolish this system, bringing alive the need and the possibility for proletarian revolution and a whole new and radically different world. So we can see that the role of our newspaper is to inform people, but also to help awaken and inspire them to act, to make them feel more powerfully the need to resist and finally to rise up in revolution, and to enable them to see what kind of revolution is needed and why and how it is possible. Our newspaper is a tool for raising people's consciousness and for enabling them to act in a more organized and unified way to advance the revolutionary cause. But just trying to educate people, especially in the sense of getting them to bring about a change in themselves, trying to do this apart from people rising up and fighting back to change the world around them, this will only go so far and cannot go far enough. People can only change themselves in a thoroughgoing way as part of and together with changing their conditions and changing the world as a whole. As people rise up to fight back, they also raise their heads and raise big questions. Everyone who has been a part of this has had the experience where once you begin to resist, you also open up. You want to know about and find the answer to all kinds of things you didn't think about or didn't even want to think about before. When this is combined with the scientific revolutionary ideology of MLM, the viewpoint and method of communism, then the ability of people to change the world and to change themselves as part of that same process and struggle, this takes a great leap. We call this scientific revolutionary viewpoint and method MLM because it is named after Marx, Lenin, and Mao, the greatest leaders of the proletarian revolution so far. The masses do repeatedly resist oppression. We have seen this and been a part of it many times. We have seen it very powerfully in the LA Rebellion of 1992, the struggle against the oppression of immigrants and other brutally exploited workers, the battle around the right of abortion and against the overall oppression of women, the movement to stop the execution of Mumia Abu-Jamal and to finally win his freedom, the fight against police brutality, against the cutbacks in welfare and the enforced exploitation of so-called welfare to work, against homes and projects being torn down and people thrown into the street. We've seen it in the recent tremendous resistance to the war against Iraq and the ongoing battle against the juggernaut, that rolling monster of war and repression carried out by the U.S. government. All this resistance has been very powerful and is very important in terms of changing what we call the political terrain and the terms of things in society, politically and ideologically. That is, how people see things and how they are moving around things in society. And again, in this process of struggling in this way, people do raise their heads and begin to think about big questions or to think about them in new ways. But until they get over the top, until they succeed in making revolution, overthrowing the system and starting to create whole new conditions and a whole new society, until that happens, people in their majority will get pulled back into the daily grind of this system and all its bullshit. Things proceed not in a straight, even line, but in waves. The resistance and rebellion of the people rises, but then recedes. It reaches a high point, but then cannot stay at that high point forever. It cannot go forward in a straight line. Just like a wave on the ocean, it crests and then breaks and flattens out. But the powerful forces producing these waves continue to operate. And once again, new surges rise up and sweep forward. We must work, strive, and struggle to come out of each crest of the wave with further advances toward revolution, with people's consciousness raised, with their organization and fighting capacity strengthened, with more people joining the vanguard of revolution. But until the wave becomes powerful enough to sweep away the whole system, until we succeed in making revolution, we will not be able to change things completely and in an all-around way from bottom to top in every part of society. This is another key reason we need a vanguard party, to unite together those who not only become more active, but who make real leaps in their understanding of what is the problem and what is the solution, who come to see that the capitalist imperialist system must be overthrown and all of society radically changed, completely transformed as part of the worldwide revolution to get to communism. The Vanguard Party provides an organized way that people who come to this basic understanding do not lose it or have it worn down, but can act to build on that understanding and can act further on it in the most powerful and unified way with others who share this understanding and the determination to act on it. And that they can continue to bring forward greater numbers of people and win them to revolution, especially as more powerful resistance once again begins to be mounted against this system and its many crimes. But when we hear, as we constantly do, the people being blamed for the conditions they are in and the choices they make in this situation, we have to come back again and again to this basic question. Did the people choose these conditions and these options the system gives them? Let's imagine a situation where you come upon a situation where a man has a gun pulled out, pointed at the head of another man. And he says to him, I can blow your brains out right now, or you can go over there and jump in that pool full of sharks. And if you're lucky, and if you learn quickly enough, maybe you'll be able to survive, and maybe you'll even become a big shark yourself. Now, what would you say if you came upon a situation like that? If you saw the person in that situation decide to jump in the shark pool and take their chances, would you say, damn, look at that fool. He jumped in a shark pool. Or would you say, damn, look at that man with the gun. He forced that other man to jump in the shark pool. And this is a situation that we find all the time. People are cast in these conditions. A gun is, if not literally, and sometimes it is literally, but in every other way is put to their head. The choices they have are no good choices for them, and whatever choice they make is going to lead to bad things. And then on top of it, they come around and blame the people for making whatever choice they make within this situation. Do you say, damn, that fool jumped in the shark pool? Or you say, damn, we have to get rid of a situation where somebody puts a gun to somebody else's head and makes them jump in a pool full of sharks. As long as this system rules, this is the way it will be, and what people in their majority will be pulled toward and forced into. This system promotes selfishness. It celebrates selfishness. And it forces people into selfishness and into fighting each other over things. And in many cases, it forces them to literally fight each other for survival. Look at what happens around us. Through the one-strike law or some other way, people in a Brooklyn housing project or in Chicago and LA are thrown out on the street, and their belongings are thrown out with them. And before they can get to their belongings, some other people in the same situation come along and steal their stuff. Or in the housing projects, when an apartment is vacated so they can tear down the building, other people will come in and steal the metal out of the window frames in order to be able to sell it to try to live, which means that then you can't fight to get the apartment repaired because it's gone beyond the situation where they will repair it. Why is this happening? Because it's human nature for people to be selfish? Because people are all fucked up? They steal the belongings of their neighbors who got evicted from the same housing project? Is it that, or is it this what the system does to people? Think once again about the differences of the peasants in China before and after the revolution, or the differences in the countryside in Nepal before and after the People's War got going and seized power in parts of that country. What is the real cause of this, and who is really to blame for this? The fact is that all this shows very powerfully the basic thing that we need the proletariat and masses of people They need a communist vanguard, and they need a revolution to lead them up and out of all this. That's what it really shows. Now, another big question is, why, to achieve real and complete liberation, do we need the world outlook of communism to guide us? The world outlook and methodology of communism is called dialectical materialism, and the application of this to human society and its historical development is historical materialism. We need a materialist understanding of reality, and we need a dialectical approach to reality. We need dialectical materialism. Well, what is it? Let's get into what this means and break it down. Dialectics refers to how things are divided into opposing parts or aspects, and to the contradiction, the conflict and struggle between these parts or aspects. It refers to the fact that there are contradictions within all things and between things, and it speaks to how different things interact and affect each other in interacting. It recognizes how things are in motion and are always changing. To break this down, let's look at some examples of this. Motion itself is a contradiction. Think about it. A person who is moving, someone who is walking or running, is in one spot and moving away from that spot at one and the same time. This is real, and it's a contradiction. Check it out the next time you walk or run, or watch someone else walk or run. Jumping is also a contradiction. The contradiction between the force pushing you upward, which you create with your legs mainly, and the force of gravity from the earth pulling you downward. For a while after you first take off, the main thing, the main aspect, is that you're going up. But after a little while, the force of gravity becomes the main thing, or the main aspect, and you start coming down again. I don't care how much hang time you talk about, you're coming down. Now, where the force of gravity is less, that is, the farther you are from the center of the earth, the higher you can jump, and the longer you can stay up before you get pulled down by gravity. This happens at higher altitude at the earth, on the earth itself, and it's even more dramatic on the moon, for example, where the force of gravity is far less. A song or a movie also has this contradiction running through it. From the beginning, it is moving toward the end. Now, if you really like it, the closer it gets to the end, even while it's still going on, you start thinking, damn, it's almost over. If you really don't like it, you start saying almost from the start, damn, I wish this thing would be over. But whether you like it or not, the contradiction between the beginning and the end, between the fact that the song or movie is playing and the fact that it will end, this contradiction runs through the song or movie as a whole until it is over. Another example of this are human beings themselves. Each of us contains life and death, the contradiction between life and death, within us throughout our lifetimes. For most of a person's life, life is the main aspect. But as that person approaches death, and then as they are dying, death becomes the main aspect, until it wins out completely, and the person doesn't exist anymore. And besides the reality that at some point, life will give way completely to death in our body overall, and we will die, there is the fact that cells and organs within our bodies, as well as our bodies as a whole, are taking in nutrients and getting rid of waste and death all the time. Dandruff, for example, is dead skin cells that your body is giving off, while at the same time, as long as you are alive, your body is creating new cells all the time. None of this is mysterious or involves anything magical or supernatural. It is all a matter of natural processes. Still another example of the dialectical relation of things is offense and defense in sports like football or basketball or soccer. Now, for example, in football, there's offense and defense. One team's on offense, the other's on defense. But there's defense within the offense and offense within the defense. Now, stay with me here. For example, in football is what they call a pass play, where one player, the quarterback, goes back and tries to throw the ball downfield to another player. This is an offensive play, but there's also defense within this offense, because in order to protect that quarterback so they can throw the ball down the field, other players have to block the defense and keep them from getting to the quarterback. And in doing that, they're aggressive. They use offensive tactics. So that's offense on that part, but there's also defense. Because the defensive team is trying to get to the quarterback, they also use offense. They try to rush to the quarterback and tackle him. So they're playing defense, but they're using offense within the defense. While the other team is playing offense, but when they block and try to protect the quarterback, they're using defense within the offense. Now let's talk about a sport that more people know about. Women as well as men. Let's talk about basketball. For example, in basketball, there's what's called offensive rebounding. That is when your team has the ball and takes a shot, and if it doesn't go in, then you try to go and get the ball back when it bounces off the rim or the backboard and try to have another chance to put it in the basket. But there's a problem here. You have to play defense within the offense, including when you're doing offensive rebounding. Because if you send all of your players to the basket to try to grab the offensive rebound and you don't get it, and the other team gets it, they'll have a very easy time going to the other end of the court and making a basket. So you have to play defense within the offense, even when you're going for an offensive rebound. You have to have some members of your team stay back to protect and play defense even while you're still playing offense. And the same thing is true of offense within the defense in basketball. For example, when you're playing defense and guarding the other team, you may try to steal the ball away from the other team. In trying to steal the ball away from the other team, you're taking an offensive action. And if you succeed, you will go from being on the defense to having the ball and now being on the offense. So in all these situations of everyday life and in sports here, you can see that there's a dialectical relation between offense and defense. They're in contradiction. There is offense within defense and defense within offense. And they're battling it out. The same thing's true in soccer. In soccer, if you're trying to move the ball down the field and you're going for a goal, you have to be careful. If you send too many players down with the ball, try to make a goal, and you don't leave anybody back to defend, then if you don't make the goal and the other team gets the ball, they may be able to come back and very quickly score on you. So while you're playing offense, you have to also play defense within that. And the other team, while they're playing defense, they're thinking about how to get the ball away from you, hoping you overextend yourself, and they can come back and go on offense and score on you. So once again, we see in these examples from everyday life, these things locked in contradiction. There is one within the other. There is offense within defense and defense within offense. And the same thing applies to war. When you attack, you also have to defend. You know, you see, remember those old westerns they used to show? Okay, now I'm going to rush them. Cover me. Well, covering you is defense. So you're taking offensive action by trying to go and get them, but you have to have defense to cover you. Well, it's the same thing in war generally. And on the other side of it is true. When you defend, you also have to attack. Otherwise, what are you doing when you're defending? If you're defending a situation or a position, and the other side is approaching you, shooting at you, you can't say, please return and go back to your prior position. That's not a very effective defense. You have to fire at them. So even within your defense, there's offense. Now this dialectical understanding applies to all things, to everything in nature, including human beings, and to human society and its development throughout history. They are all a matter of contradiction, motion, and change. So a dialectical approach enables us to see beyond the outward appearance of things to the inner character, the inner nature of them, the real nature of things, to see the fundamental and most important contradictions within all things. It enables us to see the relation of the parts to the whole. For example, parts of our body to our body as a whole, which is obviously very important in medicine, among other things. You can't treat a disease or something wrong in one part of the body nearly as well if you ignore the rest of the body as if you take it into account. And with a dialectical approach, when we look at society, we don't just see it as one big thing or a mess of different things without any relation to each other. We see the different contradictions within society and their relation to each other. For example, in capitalist society, we look below the surface and see the contradictions involved in commodity production and exchange, which lead to anarchy of production that I spoke to earlier. And we see within capitalist society the contradiction between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie is just a French word meaning the capitalist class. These contradictions are the moving and driving forces within capitalism, and they are rooted in the fundamental nature of the capitalist system as a whole. Seeing things in this way enables us to understand why capitalism is not the permanent or the highest and final form in which human society can exist, but is only one of several forms of society based on exploitation, and that capitalism contains within itself the seeds of its own overthrow and the force which can carry out that overthrow, the proletariat. So in very brief, that's dialectics. What about materialism? In a philosophical sense, materialism means something different than the way this term is often used in everyday life. When people talk about materialism, to mean a concern for material things, in the sense of consumer items and having lots of stuff. You are what you own, as it's put sometimes. Materialism in the philosophical sense refers to matter, to the fact that everything that exists is matter. Matter that once again is constantly in motion and changing in one way or another. Materialism as a philosophical outlook is the approach to reality that understands that things that really exist independently of anyone's thinking about them or seeing them or experiencing them. So in response to that old question that is often asked in philosophical discussion, if a tree falls in the forest and there is no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Materialism answers yes, in the sense that a tree that has fallen creates vibrations, or sound waves which actually exist. Those sound waves would be perceived, would be heard as sound by a person with the ability to hear if such a person were there. But whether there's anybody there or not, the sound waves exist. Now, what is matter and what does it matter? Matter is what actually exists in many different forms. It is the room we are in, the chairs people are sitting on. It is the food we will eat soon, once I finally end this talk. It is tables people will sit at when eating and the forks and so on they eat that food with. It is the energy that provides power for electricity or that doesn't. It is the wind that drives a windmill, the energy that powers a car. It is the CDs we listen to and the CD player. It is the sun and the stars in the universe, and it is the elements the stars and everything in the universe are made up of. It is the things that make up the brains of people and their thought processes. These too are chemical and electrical processes and so on, made up of real material things, of matter. Matter can be observed, studied, and affected, that is, changed by human beings, who are themselves a form of thinking matter. Matter is everything that really exists, and anything that is not matter does not exist. Understanding this and knowing what does and does not actually exist obviously matters a great deal. Applying materialism and dialectics, applying dialectical materialism, enables us to proceed from reality, to investigate what really exists, what we call objective reality, and how it is moving and changing, and in what ways that movement and change can be accelerated or slowed down or altered, taken onto a different path. Without proceeding from objective reality, we really have no hope of understanding things as they really are and as they could be. And without this understanding, we will always be at the mercy of forces which seem mysterious to us. And we will always be vulnerable to being controlled, tricked, and manipulated by people and forces in society who present things the way they are not. Now, materialism is opposed to idealism. Idealism, also, in the way I'm using it here, is a term having to do with philosophy, with how you look at and approach reality and the relation of people and their thinking to the larger world. And idealism, in this philosophical sense, also means something different than what it sometimes means in everyday terms when people talk, for example, about how someone has ideals, meaning they have principles and a lofty and not a petty vision and approach to life. Idealism in philosophical terms is the notion that reality is just a creation or an extension of the ideas of people or of some being. One form of idealism is the notion that people can do whatever they want just by sheer willpower. You can do anything you put your mind to, is the way it is often put. Well, obviously that's not true. For example, people can't fly except by making things that can fly and that can carry people, such as airplanes. It is also a form of idealism, one which is commonly heard these days, to say that there is no truth after all, but just what different people think is true. That may be your truth, but I have my own truth. This is just another way of saying that things exist in people's minds, or as the extension of people's minds and their thoughts, and they don't exist in the real world, the larger world that includes people's minds, but also much, much more. It is just another way of saying the truth is whatever anybody wants it to be. This, of course, can be very dangerous. For example, if someone thinks they can fly just by flapping their arms, and they jump off a tall building and try to fly this way, if they have time, they will discover that their truth, that they can fly this way, is not really a truth after all. Or another form of idealism is the notion that all of reality is the extension of the mind or the will of some supernatural being or beings, a god or gods. That the ultimate truth lies again in some all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing being out there or up there somewhere, which is beyond our ability to really understand, and certainly beyond our ability to change or control. This goes along with and promotes the notion that the world is a big mystery, that it is controlled by forces we cannot understand, and that the fate of things is out of our hands, that it is beyond the ability of people to fundamentally change things, at least on their own, and what we must do is to submit ourselves and obey the will of some such all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful being or beings. And of course, what is the will of this supposed supernatural being is always presented to us and interpreted for us by very human authorities. Now here, of course, I'm talking about religion. Now, as you all know, and I referred to earlier, over 150 years ago, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the original Communist Manifesto. But imagine if today communists came forward with a new manifesto. And even in this manifesto we said that anybody that practices anything different than what we agree with should be killed. That women who commit adultery should be killed. That homosexuals should be killed. That women who are accused of being witches should be killed. That children who strike or who are disrespectful to their parents should be killed. That people who get in our way should be plundered. That the women should be raped and the men should be killed and even the little children should be destroyed. Imagine if we issued a new manifesto in the name of communism that said those things. What would people say about that? Now, none of those things could be in a communist manifesto, but all of those things are in the Bible. Even in the worst slanders of communists and communist leaders, even when the most outrageous attacks are made on people like Mao or Lenin or even Stalin, even then, no one, at least as far as I know, has dared to accuse them of advocating all these things. But again, these things are in the Bible. They're not condemned, they're celebrated and upheld. These days we hear a lot about the 10 Commandments. This reactionary dog in Alabama, reminding us of George Wallace standing in this university door, insisting on posting the 10 Commandments. Imagine if you were somebody who went into that judge's courtroom and you said, well, I can't put my hand on the Bible and take an oath because I'm an atheist. How do you think you'd be treated in that fucker's courtroom? Well, since this has come up, let's talk about the 10 Commandments. All right, what is the first commandment? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. If you read on in the Bible, everybody knows that commandments and rules and laws don't mean anything unless they can be enforced somehow. So you read on in the Bible, what does it say about how this first commandment should be enforced? Anybody who does worship any other god will be put to death. Well, what about the commandment of honor thy mother and father, or father and mother? That's the way it's put. Well, again, as I just said, if you read on in the Mosaic laws, it's called in the Bible, you'll see the children who hit or are disrespectful and rebel against their parents shall be put to death. People say, oh, what's wrong with the 10 Commandments? They can't do anybody any harm. Yes, they can. And what is the 10th commandment? Notice these cowards, including this fool in Alabama, when they put up the 10 Commandments. And William Bennett did the same thing in his so-called Book of Virtues. They just say in the 10th Commandment, thou shalt not covet. They don't say what you're not supposed to covet. But if you read on in the 10th Commandment in the Bible, it says things like you're not supposed to covet your neighbor's ass or ox, or your neighbor's wife, or your neighbor's slaves. Now what's it saying there? It's not saying slavery is bad. It's saying slavery is fine. You can have slaves, just don't try to get your neighbors away from them unless they practice another religion. Then you can go slaughter them and take all their slaves away. This is a reality of the 10 Commandments. This is a reality of what's in the Mosaic Law. If you don't believe me, go read it. Read Leviticus, read Exodus, read Numbers. Read the Bible as a whole and see what it says. All this talk about Moses, and Steven Spielberg made this whole movie, The Prince of Egypt, and this wonderful figure Moses, a model for everyone. Let me tell you something about Moses. Moses is probably the most brutal tyrant that there's ever been described in all of literature. If you took all the accusations, all the outrageous slanders, all the lies and distortions that have been directed against communism and the leaders of communism, if you took all that and put it all together, Moses is all that and much worse. If you don't believe me, go check out Numbers chapter 31. When the Israelites came into the area that supposedly God had promised them, there were already people living there, so that was a problem. So even according to the Bible, they had to plunder these people and drive them out, murder them to get the land. Moses commanded them to go out and do this time and again. In fact, even with his own ranks, when people practiced another religion and worshipped a golden idol, he melted down the gold, made it into a dust, poured water and shoved it down the throats of the people. And then he took his followers and said, put to the sword everyone who is practicing this other religion. And 3,000 people, according to the Bible, were slaughtered in one day at the command of Moses, even among the Israelites, let alone what happened to other people. Let's go back to Numbers chapter 31. Moses commands his forces to go out and fight the Midianites. And they come back and Moses said, well, give me a report. What'd you do? They said, well, we plundered them and We killed off all the adult males. We got all kinds of loot, and we're bringing it back. Moses said, what the fuck's wrong with you? He didn't say, what's wrong with you because you slaughtered people and you stole all their loot. He said, you go back there and you kill every woman who's not a virgin and every male child, and then you take the virgins for yourself. If you don't believe me, go read Numbers 31. And this is the author of the 10 Commandments that we're supposed to follow. I tell you, the Bible is bloodthirsty. Some of you may know that old reggae song, by the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we wept, when we remembered Zion. Well, those lines are taken literally from the first verses of Psalm 137 in the Bible. But what's not in the reggae song, and is in Psalm 137, is the end verses of that psalm, when it talks about how the Israelites will take revenge on the Babylonians. And what are the last lines? Oh, happy will be he, O Babylon, who takes your little one and bashes in their heads. I tell you, the Bible is bloodthirsty. The Bible was not written by a God or dictated by a God. It's not the divine word of God. The Bible was written by people thousands of years ago. What kind of God would advocate these kinds of things? The Bible contains the views of ordinary human beings. It reflects their ways of understanding things and what they did not understand. It reflects the kind of societies and systems they lived in, which were marked by all kinds of brutal, oppressive relations and ideas which go along with and justify those kinds of relations. And it reflects their notion of how all this came into being, their creation in their minds of the idea of a supernatural being that created and enforces all this. And the same is true of the Quran. Go read it. Slavery, the oppression of women, taking women as prizes, virgins as prizes for the faithful, all this stuff, slaughtering other people, all that's in the Quran too. And some people say, well, what about Eastern religions? Maybe those are a little better. No. For example, some people talk about karma. You've heard about this, karma. It's bad karma. And some people think that what this means in the world is that you should be good in this life because you're going to be reincarnated in another life. That's karma. And you'll find yourself in a situation in the next life in accordance with what you've done in this life. If you've done good in this life, you'll be in a good situation. If you've done bad things, you'll be in a bad situation. Well, that all sounds nice, but the fact is that the main way that karma is used in the world, throughout the parts of the world where more than 1 billion people live who are influenced by this, the main way in which it's used is to say, not if you do good in this life, you'll have a good life in the next time around, but you must have done something bad in your last life. That's why you're suffering in this life. You must have done something bad. That's why you're poor. That's why you're oppressed. That's why you're exploited. That's why you're brutalized, because you did something in your past life that you can't even remember, but that's why you're where you are today. And so, of course, this is not going to encourage you to rise up and struggle to change your conditions if it's all settled anyway by something you did in a past life, which in fact you never had. Or take the Mormons, please. First, there is the fact that this is an outrageously reactionary sect with an outrageously reactionary set of beliefs. Besides opposing abortion for women, just to cite one other example, until pretty recently, the Mormon religion openly preached that black people are inferior. But at the same time, the fact is that the Mormon leaders made up their shit within the last 200 years. And they made up a lot of supposed history about America. And of course, there's no evidence for any of this made-up history. So although the Mormon religion is growing, especially in other parts of the world, it seems pretty ridiculous, especially to many people in this country. But think about it. it seems ridiculous because they made up their shit within the last 200 years. But our other religions or idealist systems of thought, like Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism, any less ridiculous, any less out of touch with reality because they made up their shit 1,500 or 2,000 or 4,000 years ago? Yes, it was what they understood at the time. And I wasn't there when Elijah and these other people went out in the desert, and I don't know what happened. They got in a trance, and whether they really thought they heard the voice of God or whatever. I do know if you go out in the desert wandering without water or food, you can see and hear all kinds of shit. Now, I always want to tell people, I always want to say, look, if I get sick or I need medical attention, please don't take me to no Methodist hospital, no Presbyterian hospital, no Catholic hospital, no Lutheran hospital. Please don't send me to a hospital where they think it's another world that's better than this one, and they want to hurry me to get on over there. No, send me to Atheist General Hospital where they know this is the only world and the only life we got, and we better get it right here. Now, the following lines from a song by Otis Redding, Otis Redding's song, telling a humorous little story about a preacher and a deacon, also point to something important. The preacher and the deacon went out one day, along came a bear moving their way. The preacher told the deacon to say a prayer. The deacon said, prayer won't kill this bear. I got to move it, baby. And certainly prayer won't do when it comes to the bear of a system we have to deal with and remove from the face of the earth. Now, I've been having a lot of fun as well as making serious points here talking about religion and putting forward our atheist viewpoint. But at the same time, it's very important to get serious and say that we understand that people turn to religion and take up religion and practice religion not only to uphold oppression, but for many different reasons. In fact, many people in the world today take it up as a way of seeking relief from oppression and exploitation, and even as a way of finding a set of beliefs to help them fight or join in the fight against oppression and exploitation. And we would never seek to draw the dividing lines in the struggle on the basis of who does and who does not believe in God, or who does and who does not practice religion. Our dividing lines are drawn on the basis of whether you join in the struggle and stand up in the fight against oppression. And if you do so, there's room for everybody, regardless of what their particular philosophical or religious beliefs are. And we can continue to have lots of struggle about all that as we join together to resist and fight to put an end to oppression. So our approach to religion is not one-sided, but two-sided. I think in this light about when I went to China in 1971, and I talked to someone in a family of a miner who worked in the mines in China in the old society. He started working when he was about 8 years old. And literally from the time he was 8 years old until 1950, when the revolution came to his area of the country, he had never seen the sun, because he worked every day, 7 days a week, 365 or 66 days a year, going to work in the mines before the sun came up and coming out after it went down every day. And they described how at about 10 years old, he'd become an opium addict, because that was the only way that he could deal with these horrible conditions and the seemingly endless horror of his whole life. And once the revolution came and this was changed, he was able, with the help of the whole community mobilized by the party and around its line, to get rid of this terrible habit of opium. to take part in a whole radically different kind of life. And I think of an old woman in China who told us that when she was young, she was converted to Catholicism by Catholic missionaries. And she practiced that religion in a very devoted way and prayed all the time. After the revolution came, she still prayed. But after a while, she prayed less frequently, and she went to church less frequently, only on special holidays. And finally, she said, I quit praying and quit practicing religion altogether. And when asked why, she said, because everything that I was praying for began to become true, began to become reality in the real world. Yes, of course, there were still contradictions and struggle, but she could see a whole different future, and she no longer felt the need to believe in another life where somehow these horrors would no longer exist. And we have tremendous confidence that as the revolution goes forward, as it seizes power and begins to transform society, that like that old woman in China, people will voluntarily move away from supernatural notions and hope and belief in something beyond or different from this world, which we believe and know does not exist. But we would never try to force people to give up such beliefs or again refuse to unite with them as long as they held such beliefs. Because we have a belief in the people that they can voluntarily change the conditions and change themselves. But I want to say one thing right here. There are different people practicing religion and promoting religion for radically different reasons in this society and the world. But one thing to understand is there is a certain section of people who represent a very big part of the face of fascism in this country. And those people are these reactionary religious fundamentalists, the Christian fundamentalists, people like Ralph Reed, advisor to Bush, Bush himself, Ashcroft, Jerry Falwell, and Pat Robertson. These people are enemies. These people are determined to enforce and to extend and deepen the most brutal oppression of people here and around the world in the name of religious fundamentalism and under the cover of religious fundamentalism. This is a big face of fascism in this country today. And with them, there is no seeking common ground and there is no compromise. Finally, before ending this talk, there is a need to speak more directly to some of the big charges and accusations made against communism, and in particular arguments about so-called totalitarianism, how communists are totalitarians, and the dictatorship of the proletariat is a totalitarian system. What people who say this mean by totalitarian is basically this. In socialist society, with a dictatorship of the proletariat, it is really just ruled by the party, and in particular the party leadership. And this party dictatorship exercises total control over everybody. It reaches into every part of society, even people's personal lives. Everyone has to embrace, or at least has to mouth, the official ideology. Everyone has to be actively involved in politics, and everyone has to agree with the official word, the party line in politics, and so on. Well, what's the real deal with all this? What I've spoken about so far in terms of the actual experience of socialist society, first in the Soviet Union and then in China, this points to the fact that these attacks contain a tremendous amount of distortion and of outright lies. But besides the importance of bringing forward this actual experience, yes, mistakes and errors, even some serious ones, but above all, the main thing, the tremendous achievements where socialism has existed and how this represented and served the interests of the great majority of the people. Along with bringing this forward, there is also a need to speak directly to some of the real questions that do get touched on in these accusations about totalitarianism. The fact is that in the future society of socialism and then of communism, through the educational system and in other ways, people will be taught the truth as best and as fully as it is understood at any given time. They will be taught to distinguish, to tell apart what is real from what is myth and illusion, what is fact and what is false. But more than that, they will be inspired to have the orientation and enabled to have the methods that encourage and empower them to search for the truth, the outlook and methods that give them the basis for determining how to understand reality and how to debate and wrangle over what is and what is not the truth and what is not in the interest of the people. As for having to accept the official politics, the party line in socialist society, our party is devoted and continues to devote a great deal of attention to this kind of problem and to summing up the experience with this, the positive and the negative, what has been done right and what have been the mistakes and shortcomings in the proletarian revolution and the socialist states it has brought into being so far. And this is something the whole international movement, including our party, needs to continue studying, discussing, and debating in order to come to a much deeper and fuller understanding of all this. As part of understanding this, it is important to keep in mind how the line of the vanguard party is actually developed in the first place, through applying the outlook and method of dialectical materialism in an overall way, and specifically through applying the mass line as I discussed it earlier. But still there's the question, can't the party be wrong? Can it make mistakes? Of course. Nobody can be free of mistakes. This is one of the main reasons why, for many years, and especially in recent writings and talks, I have emphasized the principle that along with having vigorous debate and healthy struggle within the channels of the party itself, we should continue to listen. We should listen with an open mind to the criticisms of others. We should, in that sense, constantly listen to and consider the interrogation of others. But that is not all. We should also constantly interrogate ourselves. Even when we think we are doing right, we should continue to question and take a critical look at what we are doing and continue to seek to learn from all the experience and all the people we can learn from. There is the old saying, defeated armies learn well. There is truth to this. When you have made mistakes, it's a good time to learn. And your mistakes can be a thing pushing you to learn and to do better. But we should also apply the principle that victorious armies should learn well too, using that in a broad and metaphorical sense, not just applying it literally to armies, but more generally. We should always seek to know more and to do better, even when we are doing well. As I put it in one recent talk, we can't know everything, so we should be good at learning. Now, another important principle that relates to this is something that was brought forward by Mao that I've also written and talked about. And that's the principle that, as Mao put it, Marxism or communism embraces but does not replace an understanding and activity in all the various spheres of human society. Now, what does that mean? It means that this philosophical understanding and method of dialectical materialism and the communist principles in general can be and should be applied to every part of reality. But they have to be applied concretely. And in the process, you have to learn as much as you can from experience and also from other people, including many people who do not agree with and do not apply communist principles and communist philosophy. Otherwise, you'll make serious mistakes of one kind or another. You'll either throw out basic principles that need to be applied, or you'll apply them dogmatically and in a way that does great harm. Let's look at how this applies in terms of some recent experience in general in life. For example, building the resistance against the recent war in Iraq. Now, it's very important to apply communist principles and analysis to understand where this war comes from, that it stems from the system of imperialism, that it's another imperialist war and what its aims are as such. But you can't just do that and stop there. There are all kinds of questions that come up in the course of building this movement. All kinds of tactical questions, but also all kinds of political questions and debates and struggles about how to understand particular things. For example, when they're saying, well, we know where the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq are, you can't just say, who cares? This is an imperialist war. You have to speak to that. You have to expose that. You have to answer that. You have to get into the particulars of that. Or when the question comes up, should we support the troops while opposing the war? You can't just say, well, that's stupid. This is an imperialist war. That answers everything you need to know. No, you have to go into the particulars. You have to wrangle with other people. You have to learn from how they're seeing it. You have to struggle things out concretely, applying the general principles and learning while doing so in this concrete situation. Or let's take a situation of a doctor in medicine. Is communist philosophy and our communist principles important in medicine? Of course. Understanding how dialectical materialism applies, as I spoke to earlier, helps you understand how to treat diseases as part of the overall situation of the body and as all part of the overall environment, the physical environment and the social and political environment that people live in, which may be affecting their bodies. So not applying the general principles there will weaken your ability to understand this. But once again, if you stop there, you can do great harm. If someone goes to a doctor and says, "Doctor, I don't feel well," and the doctor says, "Oh, that's okay, I know just what you need. Here, let me write you out a prescription for dialectical materialism," that's not going to do very much good and will actually do a lot of harm. You have to get into the particulars. You have to talk to the patient. You have to maybe get out a medical book and study the particularities of medical science and learn from that while you're applying the general principles. So this principle of embraces but does not replace applies across the board, and it's extremely important in order to avoid making mistakes of one kind or another, falling into a pragmatic approach of throwing out principles and just going with whatever seems to work at a given time, or on the other hand, upholding principles but applying them and stuffing them down people's throats in a very dogmatic way that doesn't solve problems at all. This is something we have to learn now, and it has great importance in terms of the future when the party is leading the people in socialist society. In socialist society, there should be an atmosphere in which it is possible, and there should be space for people to disagree with the party and its line, to disagree with official policy, to openly express those disagreements, and to be able to keep those disagreements to themselves if that's what they want to do. They should be able to do that without being bugged and harassed, without being regarded and treated as suspect or a threat to the revolution. Of course, we want debate and wrangling throughout society about all kinds of things, including the party's line and official policy. But this is not something that can be or needs to be forced. It is something that can be and should be encouraged and promoted. And again, the atmosphere should be created in which this can and will flourish, in which it will come forth without the need to force it, and without the attempt to suppress it, except in cases where what is involved is an actual move to organize the overthrow of the old socialist, of the new socialist state, to bring back the old society with all its oppression and misery for the masses of people. No one can be forced to accept as right and true something they do not believe. People have to be convinced that something is true, and attempting to force them to believe something when they are not convinced of it can only do harm, and often great harm. Now, it is a fact that in socialist society, some people may have to accept that certain things will be done even when they do not agree with those things. And if you think about it, this is actually true in all societies. There could never be any kind of society where literally everyone agreed with everything that was done. For example, communists are atheists, as I've emphasized. We do not believe in God or any kind of supernatural beings or forces. In socialist society, the party will spread and promote this understanding. And through the educational system and in other ways, a scientific viewpoint, as opposed to a religious one, will be taught and encouraged. But while this will be and must be the policy, so long as some people are still not convinced of the communist viewpoint on religion, it would be wrong and would do great harm to try to force them to give up their religious beliefs. As I have been emphasizing, our party's study of the history of the international communist movement and the experience of socialist states so far has led us to recognize the importance not just of allowing, but of valuing dissent in socialist society. This has to do with fundamental things about how the revolution should be carried forward under socialism and how the party should actually lead this. And it has to do with what kind of society and world we are really aiming for. First of all, there is the basic principle that in order to emancipate themselves, in order to run society and revolutionize the world, masses of people need to wrangle with, they need to think about, to discuss and debate all kinds of things. The more this goes on, the richer the whole process will be in socialist society. And for that matter, the party will learn more. The application of the mass line by the party will be deeper and fuller. The conditions will be more favorable for the party to recognize and to correct its mistakes. What is arrived at as line and policy by the party and the government will have more basis to be correct and more basis to be deeply understood and taken up with more enthusiasm and determination by more people. And in an overall sense, and in society as a whole, it will be more the case that creativity will be encouraged and unleashed among people. New ideas will be brought forward and wrangled over, even ideas that differ with what the party thinks at a given time, and new truths will be continually discovered. In terms of everyone having to be involved in politics, the biggest challenge is to overcome the ways in which, under the capitalist system, the masses of people are locked out of any real involvement in politics. Politics that have any meaning and have anything to do with political decision-making, along with being locked out of many, many other important parts of society. Here it is important to recall what I said earlier about how one of the main features of socialist society and one of the main aims of the advance through this socialist stage to communism is for the masses of people to take up all kinds of questions and to have their creativity set loose in all kinds of ways. The aim is not just for people to have a job and work at one job, but to master many things, to contribute to planning the economy to meet the needs of the people, and to support the revolutionary struggle worldwide, to developing medicine and health care, to providing sports programs for the youth and the population as a whole, to creating and producing music, movies, television, programs on the internet and so on, and writing poetry, to political decision-making and the organization and administration of society, to debating questions like whether anything in the universe can actually travel faster than the speed of light, and what lessons should be drawn from scientific discoveries of many different kinds. And the aim is to develop and unleash individuality and creativity on the foundation of and within this broad and overall framework of cooperative and collective efforts and goals. These are not just things that a few geniuses can understand and play a role in. The masses of people as a whole are fully capable of entering into and taking up all these spheres. And that is precisely what is and what must be made possible through the communist revolution. To make this possible, that the masses of people, and not just a relative handful, can and will do these things, will take a conscious, consistent, and determined struggle to overcome inequalities that have been handed down to us by capitalist society and thousands of years of unequal and oppressive relations in society and in the world as a whole. Overcoming all that cannot happen without a system of political rule that gives the masses of people the right and the power to do this, and to prevent the overthrown exploiters or others from sabotaging and wrecking this process. Once again, this system of political rule is the dictatorship of the proletariat. And all this cannot happen without a vanguard of the proletariat to lead it in carrying out this complicated and often very intense struggle to bring about these changes in society and in the world. In thinking about this, I was drawn to the example of, which might seem a little odd, but it has a real relevance here. I was drawn to the example of Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong is one of the great cyclists in the world, one of the great bicycle racers in the world. He's won probably the most important and major bicycling race in all of the world, the Tour de France, five years in a row. But back before that a little while, his whole bike riding and bike racing career was disrupted because he developed cancer. When he developed cancer, he didn't say, oh well, who cares if I have cancer? As soon as I get a surgery or medicine for it, I'll just get right out and race again and be able to win the Tour de France again. No. He knew that he needed rehabilitation. He knew he needed medicine. He knew he needed people to help him be able to return to and be able to rise to these heights. Now, there is a great cancer in society: capitalism, the latest in a long line of sickness in humanity's existence. Radical surgery and rehabilitation is needed. The seizure of power and the revolutionary transformation of the world. This is needed in order for humanity to overcome this. Lance Armstrong needed people schooled in medicine and in physical therapy in order for him to return to the position where he could reach the heights that he has. And the masses of people, the proletariat and masses of people, need the dictatorship of the proletariat and a vanguard party to enable them to fully overcome the cancer of capitalism and finally to soar to heights never before reached. They need this. They need this in order to overcome the forces that represent the old society and in order to overcome the scars and wounds from that old society. Now, in all this, here is a great irony. There are those who say that they agree we need a different society, where a small group does not dominate and exploit the rest. Yet while they say they agree with this, they condemn the dictatorship of the proletariat. They declare that vanguard leadership can only lead to tyranny. They insist that there should be pure democracy, where right from the start, everyone takes part equally in decision-making without any established leaders. Well, if they were to have their way, and there were an attempt to change society and model it according to their vision, the best that could happen, if you want to call it the best, would be that people like them would become the new group that dominated and exploited the masses of people, ruling once more over the great majority, who have always been locked out of political decision-making and the affairs of society and government, and who in reality would remain locked out of this. This is the great irony involved in their thinking. To understand why this is so, let's start with a more immediate expression of this irony. Some people, including those who are more familiar with political discourse and with the concepts I have just spoken of here, they would have no trouble understanding what I've been saying about this great irony. Even if they didn't agree with me, they would understand what I have been saying. But those who have been locked out of any real involvement in the affairs and direction of society, those who have been denied access to the kind of education and working with ideas that would enable them to be familiar with the concepts I am speaking of here, an education that would give them the facility to engage these concepts, those people would have no idea what I have been getting at here. They would have no sense of what I've just been talking about. What the hell is he saying? So let's break this down. Let's start with the word irony. What does it mean? One kind of irony is when you use a word in a way that what you mean by it is the opposite of the usual meaning of the word, or what you are expressing in a particular circumstance is in conflict with what actually makes sense to say in that situation. Another kind of irony is when you do something and the result of it is the opposite of what you intended to happen. Let's look at some examples. You see someone playing basketball on the playground, or you see a young kid singing at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, and you say, she's bad, or he's bad, actually meaning they're very good. Or someone comes up with an idea, but it leads to everything going wrong. For example, a group of friends get together one day on a Saturday, and one of them says, why don't we go to the beach? So without looking into it very much or checking the weather or anything else, they get in the car and they drive off toward the beach. They get halfway there and they run out of gas. So they run down a gas station, and an hour later they got enough gas, and they limp over to the beach. They get in the beach, and they start relaxing, and all of a sudden the storm comes up. They hadn't checked the weather. It's going to rain that day. They got caught in the storm. So then they go get back in the car, and they drive, and they get a flat tire. And they have to fix a flat tire, and finally they get home, and they're soaking wet, and it's been a mess. And someone says, well, that was a good idea. Obviously meaning it was a very bad idea. Well, those are examples of irony. Here's another example of irony. Someone has to catch an airplane or a bus, but they don't make it on time. Then the bus or the airplane crashes and everyone on it is killed. There's an irony here. If they'd been on time, they would have been killed. Then the person thanks God for saving their life. That too is an irony. Because really God is being thanked for causing a tragedy. If God gets the credit for causing that particular person's life to be saved by being late, you would have to say that God also caused the accident that killed so many people. And that's not something that a God should be credited with and thanked for. But the bigger irony is that they are thanking God and God does not exist. Returning now to the main point I'm making here. For those people who say they want a society without one group dominating others, and they want to bring this into being right away, without any leaders to make this happen, the great irony is that their program and approach would lead to exactly the opposite of what they say they want. It would lead precisely to a group dominating and exploiting others. And a further irony is that this group would include them or people just like them, because they would be familiar with everything that goes into running a society while others had been locked out. Think about the kinds of things that have to be taken up, the kinds of problems that have to be faced and dealt with in building a movement to make revolution in the first place, and then to go on and not just rule society, but completely remake it in the interests of the masses of people and the interests of the whole world revolution. All the kinds of things that I have pointed to in the course of this talk. To deal with all that requires an understanding, not just of specific problems, but of the scientific method for digging into problems and contradictions and for finding the solution to them. It requires and can only be done with the kind of communist, materialist, and dialectical outlook and method I have spoken about. The masses of people can and will take all this up and become masters of all these spheres and parts of society, and of society and the world as a whole. But to do that, when we are starting out with a whole legacy and tradition of tremendous inequality, brought about through hundreds of years of capitalist exploitation, and thousands of years of oppression and the force and dead weight of oppressive tradition, to overcome that requires and can only be done with the dictatorship of the proletariat and the leadership of the proletariat's vanguard party. It is this which will make it possible for the masses of people to more and more consciously and confidently take up and conquer all the different spheres of society and to continue advancing toward the point where everyone can really take up and take part in all this on an equal basis. Without this, and if people who had been locked out of all this were suddenly told, go ahead, you can take part equally in everything. You can teach physics, you can practice medicine, you can run a factory, you can plan a whole economy, you can write about philosophy, you can organize the government. There is nothing now to stop you. If they were just told that, you know what they'd say? What the fuck are you talking about? I don't know how to do all those things. And they would be right. They would get angry and get demoralized and discouraged because they would not know how to do those things. And they could not keep up with those who had experienced the advantage and privilege of learning about and doing these things in the old society. On their own, they would not be able to do this. But with the leadership of their vanguard, they would be enabled to learn and to do these things, to take part more and more fully in these things, and even to provide leadership to others, including specialists and experts in these fields, in a way that didn't suppress but unleashed did not suffocate but unleashed the initiative and creativity of such specialists and experts, and that helped them apply their expertise in an overall way to benefit society and humanity. It is the masses of people and not a handful of people, no matter how sincere or even heroic, who make history. And above all, the kind of revolution that is needed to completely change society and the world and put an end to a situation where the masses of people are exploited and oppressed. This revolution requires the ever more conscious and active role of the masses of people. But once again, for this to really happen, the masses of people need leadership, the leadership of their communist vanguard. As I emphasized in a recent interview with Carl Dix, you can speak in the name of the masses all day long and rail against leadership all day long in the name of the masses or in the name of some other principle. But if you don't actually recognize the need for leadership and the fact that this need flows out of the very contradictions of the society you're seeking to overturn and transform, then you're going to leave the masses entirely out of the equation, and there's not going to be a revolution, and certainly not one that leads to the emancipation of the broad masses of people. Without a communist vanguard, even if we could imagine that somehow a revolution could be made, which in reality it could not, even then, given the great inequalities that you would be inheriting, what you would have once again would be a situation where those who were formerly on the bottom of society would find themselves once more on the bottom, lorded over and bossed around by people with more privilege and the advantages that go with that. And or you would have a situation where, out of anger and frustration, those who had been on the bottom would blindly strike out, seeking revenge against anyone who had anything that had been denied to them, including people they should be uniting with. In any case, what you would soon get is a return to a society based on exploitation and oppression. It is only with the leadership of a vanguard, basing itself on the communist outlook and methodology, that these problems and contradictions can be handled correctly and overcome, that the situation can be brought into being in which the proletariat, together with its allies, making up the great majority, actually rules and revolutionizes society, and in which the inequalities left over from the old society can be overcome in a way that embraces and more involves the great majority of people in consciously and voluntarily carrying forward this revolutionary process, and which leads finally to the emancipation of humanity as a whole from all relations of oppression and exploitation. At the same time, through the advance of the revolution in overcoming these inequalities, with the leadership of the communist vanguard, we will be moving in the direction of reaching a world where finally there will no longer be a need for a vanguard. There will no longer be a situation where some work only with their minds while others are worked, bending their backs and wearing out their flesh, and still others suffer and may even face starvation and death because they cannot get work. No longer a situation where a few lead and the great majority can only follow, where a small clique make decisions that must be carried out by the rest. And when we do reach that point, where all that is no more, there will no longer be a need for a vanguard party and for a state, for dictatorship of any kind, to ensure that these inequalities are being overcome to the greatest degree possible at every point, and that the soil that gives rise to them is finally and fully dug up. Reaching that point is exactly the goal of our revolution and of the vanguard in leading that revolution. To emphasize this crucial point once more, carrying forward this revolution to reach the goal of communism is a matter of dealing with the challenges, the problems and contradictions of socialism as a transition to communism, which I've spoken to throughout this talk. It is also a matter of keeping in mind and building on what our class and our revolutions have achieved, the things we have brought into the world that never existed before. It is a process of learning from the mistakes and the shortcomings in this, as well as the tremendous achievements. There is a great deal to learn and to do. a great deal to be learned while we are doing, and a great deal to be done while we are learning. A whole world to be conquered and transformed through the back and forth process of making revolution and at the same time learning more deeply how to make revolution more thoroughly. Yes, there is a danger that will remain until communism is finally reached worldwide. The danger that the vanguard party can be turned into its opposite, turned around from being the advanced force of the masses of people, which leads them in emancipating themselves, turn from that into a new group of exploiters that rules over the masses and drags them back down the road to capitalism and all the hell it means. But the way to deal with this danger is not to try to do without a vanguard party, to do away with the very thing the masses need most of all in order to finally put an end to capitalism and all exploitation and oppression, to rob the masses of people of the chance to finally be free. No, the answer is to continue transforming the economic and social relations, the political institutions and structures, and the ideas that rule in society, to dig more and more deeply into the roots and soil of exploitation and oppression, and to aim at nothing less than digging them out altogether all over the world. This is what must be the guiding star for all who seek all the way liberation. This and nothing less must be the aim of growing numbers of masses as well as their communist vanguard. As I have put it before, the party must not only lead the masses to seize power and set out on the socialist road toward communist society, but in socialist society, the party must be a party in power and a vanguard of revolutionary struggle against any parts of power that are blocking the road to complete liberation. It must lead the people to continue making revolution, while at the same time the party itself is continually revolutionized in the context of this continuing revolution throughout society and throughout the world. Even as it plays its role as vanguard, the party must always keep in mind and lead the advance step by step and leap after leap toward the future, where finally the people as a whole can fully take up themselves all the responsibilities and functions which the party takes up as its special role in this historical period. Toward a future where there will be no longer any need for a vanguard party, and it will cease to exist in a situation in which society as a whole will take as its foundation and point of orientation the administration and development of society for the common good of humanity. Until that future is reached, either weakening the vanguard role of the party or, on the other hand, failing to recognize and struggle against the danger that the party can be turned around into an oppressive force working against revolution, either of these will prevent revolution or cause the revolution to be lost, even if it is won at first. Handling well the very complicated contradictions involved in all this is something that must be recognized as a crucial challenge. A challenge for the party as it grows and is strengthened in its vanguard role, and a challenge for ever greater masses of people who themselves come to recognize this challenge and consciously struggle together with the party to take this on in making revolution and advancing through socialism to a communist world. In conclusion, I want to put forth a challenge, a call. Get with this. Get with the party. If you're already with this, get with it even deeper. Take it up even more fully and firmly, in an even more conscious and determined way. Take out to more and more people the party's newspaper, The Revolutionary Worker, which brings to life the real features of this putrid system and the possibilities of a whole new and radically different world. Take up the party's program, a program that lays out the vision of that radically different world, and the plan and the means for making that vision a reality. A program that has been and is being developed through the application of the mass line, through the involvement of many people, inside and outside the party, from many walks of life and many parts of society, from the housing projects and garment centers to professors, doctors, and other professionals. Promote wide discussion and debate around this program as a vital part of the process of sharpening and wielding this program as the basic guide to revolution. Let people know who do not know yet that they have a vanguard party and what this means for the masses of people here and all over the world. Let them know that with this vanguard party, there is a way out of all this madness and needless suffering and misery. And for people who are learning of this, the challenge is to get tighter with the party, and then to come into the party and help strengthen and build it as the revolutionary vanguard the proletariat and masses of people so deeply need. Take our revolutionary line and vision, our understanding of the world, and our method for understanding the world, and our program and plan for changing the world through revolution. Take this to ever-growing numbers of people and struggle to win them to this. Build resistance and organization among all sections of the people and work to link this more and more closely with the party. Take the line of the party everywhere. Everywhere people are fighting back. Everywhere they are questioning, does the world have to be like this? Everywhere they are suffering, but are searching or even hoping for a way out. Everywhere they talk about how we need some kind of real change, and especially where they say that we need some kind of revolution. Move them to see how revolution is possible, what this revolution is all about, and how it can and must be prepared for and carried out. How the revolutionary consciences and the fighting capacity and organization of people oppressed by this system must be built with its foundation and stronghold among the proletarians and also among other sections of the people. And how all this must be tied together and led by the party to make the prospect of revolution real. Spread the influence of the party and the organized ties of the party with growing numbers of people, among the proletariat, among the oppressed peoples, among the youth, among the intellectuals, among all parts of society. Build strongholds of resistance and of support for revolution led by the party everywhere, in the places where we live and where we work, in the schools we go to. Build the party, support and defend the party and its leadership. Do this in such a way that the party and its ability to lead the masses to fight for their emancipation can become stronger and deeper in the face of the enemy and its attempts to attack and crush resistance and revolution, in such a way that the enemy is not able to rob the masses of people of the means to find and to fight their way out of this horror of capitalism, imperialism. We should, in a real way, be on a mission with this, and everyone should seek to contribute in whatever way they can to this. We need to bring this to people, this revolution and its vanguard party, the Revolutionary Communist Party. We need to bring this alive for them. We need to strengthen the RCP as the vanguard of this revolution in the U.S. as part of the Revolutionary Internationalist movement. We need to strengthen the Revolutionary Communist Youth Brigade, the RCYB, as a vital force of revolutionary youth, following the line and leadership of the RCP, mobilizing and organizing growing numbers of youth into revolution and bringing many into the party itself. We need to prepare for the serious task of revolution right within this belly of this most monstrous beast. We need all to contribute all we can to this revolutionary cause, this heroic struggle worldwide. In terms of what our lives can be about, is there anything else that even compares to this? A better world is in birth. We have the challenge and the great opportunity to put this old world, this monstrous system of oppression, misery, destruction, and massive needless death into its grave and to hasten the new world into being. As I've said before, this is something that in the past a slave could only dream of. Living in this time, we can dream of this, yes, and we should dream of it, but we can also do much more than that. The basis is there for this to become a reality, and we can work and struggle and do our part to make it a reality. The last time I spoke publicly in the U.S., I referred to a song, a beautiful song by Nina Simone. Nina Simone wrote many beautiful and powerful songs, including many indicting this system and its oppression of black people and other horrors it causes. She became so sick to death living in this country and all that it did, she couldn't take it anymore, and she left and went to France, where earlier this year she died. But before that, she had written this beautiful song that said, "I wish that I knew how it felt to be free." The last time I spoke, I referred to this song. It was not long after Mao had died. Revisionists, people who pretended to be communists but had revised the revolutionary heart out of communism and had brought it down to nothing more than the outlook and methods of capitalism. These revisionists had seized on this situation of Mao's death and had seized power. They had taken China back down the road to capitalism with all its madness and misery for the masses of people. The leader of this revisionist coup and capitalist restoration, Deng Xiaoping, was visiting the U.S., making deals with the imperialists to plunder China and its people. When I spoke then, I talked about how, for a time all too short, before it was snatched away from them, the people of China did know what it felt like to be free. And even though it was stolen away, that feeling and that experience have become part of our positive legacy, a legacy of tremendous importance for the masses of people all over the world. We can and must build on this, learn more deeply, and fight with greater understanding as well as greater determination, finding the ways to come back each time we fail, each time we fall or are pushed back, until the summit is finally reached. What Nina Simone died still wishing for is something that people throughout the world can come to know, and we can be part of bringing this alive. Let us raise our heads and keep our eyes on this prize. Let us dare to set our sights on conquering the heights of revolution, and together with our brothers and sisters throughout the world, conquering the world and setting humanity free. Let us gladly, with determination and with joy, dedicate ourselves to doing all we can to bring this into being and pass on to our future generations the greatest gains toward this goal that we can, so that what we push forward now, they can advance even further. What peaks we reach now, they can stand on and then ascend even higher, so that building on what we do, they will finally finish what has been started, and a whole new, beautiful day will finally dawn for humanity.